okay. Yeah. You know what? It didn't hit live. That's okay. We're recording this. I'll upload it later. We missed. I apologize. I don't know what happened there. I hit the button.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay. Here we are. Okay.
Oh,
It's all
So
good.
we missed. For those of you joining us, we missed. I think there was a technical glitch. It didn't. It didn't go live immediately. So I was like, nobody's watching. Like, what the hell's going on here? So Sebs pointed out that so for some reason it didn't click. So I'll upload it afterward with the what you missed, folks. But thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Greetings.
Thank you, Sebs. I wish you would have said that, but
I'm sorry.
I was like, look, I was like, nobody's commenting. What the hell's going on here? Okay. Anyway,
I thought it was like on a delay or something. My bad.
Yeah, that would have been a serious delay. So, Allison, you want to just set up this clip real quick, or I guess you kind of already have.
So we were just talking about essentially the counterpoint to DAOs, right? So this would be the uncorporate, the commoning version of the blockchain cooperative for emancipatory liberation on the chain. This is
okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Did you see that dandelion at the end?
Yeah.
I did. They're taunting you. They know.
There's a certain amount of coding going on in there.
The dandelion's actually used by a bunch of different like techno blockchain spaces, I've noticed.
Mm-hmm. Cardano too was using it for one of their like random little protocols.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you want to say about that,
this
Allison?
transnational institute is connected with the Institute for Policy Studies, and I need to spend a little bit more time looking into that, but it goes back to the 70s. And so it's framed as, well, it's definitely today as the green economy, the sharing economy. And, again, this hard counterposition to the corporate culture, but it's the polarity, right? Because they're using the same tools. They're just juxtaposed against one another.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like the tokenization, and this is what I want to talk about a little bit, like the other aspect of your piece with the futarchy was the self-actualization, or this sort of cypherpunk, extropian, transhumanist angle, because I think there's definitely something in the tokenization of all of our social transactions tied to well-being and value that are about a lot more than just the social control and profit aspect, but it's actually about like moving us in the direction towards a cybernetic, like, post-human age.
Yeah. Living as a hologram type of thing. Yeah.
Real quick,
for sure.
Real quick, for those who just joined us, again, at the very beginning, we weren't live when we were having a discussion. At the end of, once we end here, I'll go ahead and just replay live. We'll continue live, and I'll replay that first section for you, and then later on I'll upload the whole thing. So that way you can the chat. You guys can get your chat on.
So I was going to say, just as far as like the kind of moving us toward or transitioning us, getting us ready to transition into this like H plus or human plus H2 realm. So that's kind of where the Max Moores of the world kind of come in, right, with the extropians. So Max Moore was the gentleman, I believe he's from Welsh, and he founded the extropian movement in the early 80s or mid 80s. around that time. So it was based on principles like, boundless expansion, self-transformation, or is it spontaneous order, dynamic optimism, right? Just like relentless optimism, as Stacey Herbert likes to say. But so it was kind of founded on those principles. But in addition to that, the extropian proponents of cryonics, right? So cryogenic freezing, like kind of suspended animation type of thing. And then they thought that digital money or digital currencies could be a good store of value for when they woke back up, right? So that's kind of how the cryonics aspects of it comes in. And then you look into Max Moore, who is also head of Alcor, which is like the world, leads the world in cryogenic freezing services. So, but go ahead.
Yeah. Wow. No, I think that's really interesting. I mean, the holding the electronic currency and the whole store of value while you're like waiting for the next whatever era of reawakening. Like I often mention the Enderverse books, the Orson Scott Card, who was the great great grandson of Brigham Young, and like in one of the books, actually later on, there's this sentient AI who's like his friend that talks to him in his ear all the time, and as he's Ender is porting back and forth across these different time zones in the planets, he like manipulates time. Like he can be 1,000 years old because he's always just moving back and forth through different time dimensions. And in that, like his AI Jane is his portfolio manager. So he's incredibly wealthy because he's lived for forever. And he has this super trader AI, like and he doesn't care about money, right? Like he just does it. He just doesn't even think, but whatever he wants to do, he can do because Jane has made sure that his money is all set. So, and you imagine the digital cash and what these AI trading markets may be like. And it's, it's
it is kind of crazy because it goes hand in hand, like with the whole, like the cryonics, proponents and the, waking up in however many years, 50 years, whatever, from your death, right? Or I don't even really know exactly how that works scientifically, but it just seems kind of strange. But like the digital cash aspect of it, that was the point of that. That's how that started. They will say, like, with David Chaum and was it Nick Szabo and all those guys, like, oh yeah, well, we want anonymous, we want the central banks out of our lives. We anonymous transactions where the central banks and the banking cartel can't tell you what to do with your money and whatnot. So that's kind of like how it's sold on the surface. But then you peel one layer and it's like, oh, okay, so you want to use it as a store of currency or store of value for when you wake up in however many years, because you plan on getting yourself cryogenically frozen. And Hal Finney actually did do that. And Hal Finney is the first person to ever receive any Bitcoin from this quote unquote Satoshi Nakamoto figure. That and Hal Finney is one of the original extropians, along with like the Nick Szabos, David Chaum, and Tim May, who also created this thing that was very similar to WikiLeaks called Blacknet in the 90s. That's also another that's another layer to it as well.
Wow. Well, and the thing I thought was interesting about the extropians, it said that they were trying to fight entropy. Like that was their sort of frame, like they were anti-entropy. And so, one of the thought experiments I'm trying to spin out is, this idea of quantum thermodynamics or whatever. And the woman, like the steampunk woman, talking about creating these tiny engines of entangled particles that through that they hope to create something that is like a perpetual energy machine that does go around the second principle of thermodynamics. So, I mean, they don't identify as extropian, but it's quite interesting that these alternative energy sources are still out there in the quantum realm, and the way in which, in my mind, you'd have to have, billions upon billions of entanglements to make any kind of real energy, because it's just tiny, tiny bits. But if the entangled particles were tokenized and tied to our digital twins, and brought to scale, like yesterday or in the Andreessen Rogan interview, he's like, I can't remember, Jason, what the particular law was, but there was something like X squared, that every extra person like magnified the power of the network exponentially. Like all of those little tokens like tracked across your digital twin could amount to something. So, but
no, for sure. And then they could also have a bunch of the quantum entanglements, like you were saying, when you have because you can make an infinite amount. So that's how you would, capture, I guess, those interactions essentially, even if they're synthetic. It sounds crazy when you say it out loud, but it's kind of
I know, but I mean, they're really talking about it. Well, Jason,
I would just say that, I mean, I think it's important to make sure we separate what's like in the theoretical realm and versus and obviously there's two different things going on here, and there are real world real case uses for entanglements in terms of manipulation and control. But like me personally, I still don't understand how actual energy is created from that, and I don't understand the quantum physics things. Someone mentioned the cryogenics doesn't work. They said that's why Walt Disney is still frozen. But they did create Walt Disney on Ice, so I don't know. But I don't know. I just like some of that stuff is a little bit too far out of my.
Well, I would invite people look up the quantum, like the electrothermodynamics, because they're talking about it. Physicists talk about very conceptual things. We're not making this up. Like, well,
but there's like string theory. There's lots of different theories, but I'm more interested in like, okay, how does this affect people in their actual, like, the entanglement thing does make sense to me, like from just like in terms of like political entanglements and how that's can use to shape and direct people and misdirect people. But in terms of the science, I guess I don't really quite understand how that works. But anyway, I don't know. I guess I'm kind of lost when those conversations.
Unless you just want to take like quantum off the table, you can do that personally. But in the real world, it's actually affecting policy and military spending and a lot of stuff because they're working on it. Like it's not fringe. These are
for sure, it's not fringe. But a lot of it's still a lot of it's still theoretical, is all I'm saying.
But the thing is, there are these layers of like logic, right? So you've got digital twins, and people would be like, someone who had no idea about the new planned information economy or the impact economy or any of it would just be like, that's dumb. Like most people, average people, and you tell them these things and they're just like, well, I wouldn't do that. That seems dumb. Right. And so, they don't actually go to the next stage and understand, well, what is the logic behind this? Well, the logic is the new economy's information. The new information is generated by all sorts of data, by your behaviors, your biology, your communication. Like there's a value in that. So there's that logic. There's the logic of betting on your behavior. That's a whole nother logic. But then if there's another logic of entanglement and twinning, that becomes an alternative energy, which clearly they're devising all sorts of energy programs, including piezoelectric and human piezoelectric harvest, which again, tiny amounts, but it's what happens when every surface of the built environment becomes piezoelectric. And as you walk down the sidewalk, you're powering some shit. You know what I mean? Like that's the future that they've imagined. And so I think we have to, consider it because, and maybe if we can show the hypercerts video, what I think is happening is that everything is getting entangled to everything else in these nodes. And I feel like within the blockchain space, there's all the side chains. Like your twin is just going to be all sorts of tangled side chains that kind of like come together, and the AI can recognize the meaning of all of that entanglement and make some pattern recognition out of it. So the impact finance,
that's where the value is.
Or you're being the donor, that is an entanglement like on the blockchain. And so this guy, and maybe when we get done reading or watching this clip, we can pull up, there's a bio of him and we could just read it because it's pretty terrifying and it intersects with the brain science and the transhumanism. This guy has links to Peter Thiel, like special private money from him to work on his hypercert project. Okay. This is just like 2 minutes.
Back for a minute and talking about what certs are at all. What's the problem space that impact certificates are trying to address? Well, when a contributor performing an activity produces a public good, It's often the case that some members of the public, such as philanthropists and others, would be happy to exchange money for that impact having been realized. But unfortunately, because it's a public good that was produced in the past by this point, there is no one to give the money to and nothing to exchange it for. So this transaction doesn't really seem feasible. What the funder really wants to do is to send the money back in time and retrocausally use it to fund that activity, making it more likely to have already taken place. But unfortunately, this seems physically infeasible. But there is the potential of using a wormhole. A less costly idea is impact certificates. This represents the right to future retroactive rewards for a public good producing activity. And whenever an asset that represents the right to a future cash flow is on the table, that induces the presence of a special kind of person called an investor who specializes in anticipating future cash flows and exchanging money for them today. In a transaction where they purchase an impact certificate from the contributor in advance of the activity, thereby providing the funding signal that anticipates the future rewards that are caused by the impact, and closing the loop here actually also makes that transaction possible by giving the public someone to hand the money to after the fact, and a plausible story about how doing so actually does retro-cause the activity to be more likely to have been funded via the investor's anticipatory signal. So that's what impact certificates are trying to do. But in reality, activities are not isolated points like individual paintings that one might trade in an NFT market. They're highly interconnected. So when one of them produces a public good, it's not always obvious who owns the right to that retroactive funding. That's where hypercerts come in. I introduced this concept of the public goods space. This is a sort of geometric space with many axes. For example, the time the work was done and the scope of the work. And a hypercert represents a territorial claim in this public goods space. It represents the right to retroactive rewards that are attributable to that region of public goods space.
Okay. Yeah, and so I want to just clarify something real quick. I think there's two different things that we're talking about: the actual science and physics of it, and then the artificial thing of money and these certs, and these things are artificial things, and then the theory obviously will influence these artificial constructs, which then actually affect our lives in the real world. Just like money, I tell people money's not real, and they're like, "What are you talking about? If I don't pay my rent, whatever." So there's it's like where reality and the artificial and the natural overlap. I don't know, but anyways, I think it was just there's two different things that are actually overlapping there, I guess is what I'm saying. So I brought up his bio here.
Can you maybe just read it out, Jason? Because I can't read it.
Oh, sure.
But,
I can actually bring it. I can actually bring it full screen. Oh, yeah. I have you guys low res too. I can bring your resolution up a little bit, and we'll see how it affects your. There we go. So, David Darrell.
Yeah. So this is his bio on the Brain Preservation Foundation. Okay. So, and this is why, like, when I saw that and I read your article, Sebs, I'm like, oh, these two things are very interrelated with the extropians and the tokenization. So he's affiliated with the MIT Media Lab, oh gosh,
he went to UMBC. Yeah, as well. University of Maryland, Baltimore County. That's UMBC. Interesting.
Oh wow, there you go. Former neighbor.
Yeah,
so computer science graduate student.
I went there for a semester. So.
Studying worm neurobiology and microscopy. Okay, and so he was already at the White House with his Legos, his winning Lego project. And at 9, he joined Ray Kurzweil on a TED Talk, and he was like the youngest person to enroll in an MIT graduate program. Yeah, so University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and MIT Media Lab with a 5.0 GPA at age 16, and was at Singularity University. So then we've got Kurzweil in the mix, right? Mm-hmm. And so he's been involved with the MIT Media Lab Center for Bits and Atoms. And it's interesting because I mentioned Cooperation Jackson was affiliated with that disco cooperative program. They also had a fab lab, and a lot of the tech they were using there was open source that came out of this MIT Bits and Atoms program. And maybe we can talk a little bit about the Negroponte book, that being digital. But just looking at like, the automata and, reading, the AI, the brain science. It's, to me, when I see that where like the context in which this person is situated has been from a very young age around biophysics. And I think, Jason, what you're talking about is this, there's physics and then there's how it relates to your biology. And I think the line is getting blurry, especially if they want us to start living increasingly in an avatar existence. Like we'll be in the Tron plane, in these figures, and our simulations may already be. We just don't necessarily know what they look like at this point. We may be stored over in the sentient world simulation over at Purdue already. But these are the people developing these certs, and they're actually laying it out on grids that on the one hand is like a physics and a math problem, but that involve time, the fourth dimension, which is very clearly, he references the idea of wormholes and time travel in the structure, and also the tokenizing, like you get token credit. Like the idea is for those hypercerts, based on your participation, your contribution, there will be a permanent record as to what that is. How much did you contribute? What was the value of that contribution? And that retroactively, years later, if it's a public good, you may get paid back on that. But it's a permanent log, so that, for me, that feels incredibly dehumanizing to turn society into a fully cybernetic construct under the premise that you're making equality, or you're making something like that. Like, are they going to put lots of kids in Africa in VR headsets to code the metaverse and call it a public good? And someday when they're 75 and they're facing like putting their brain in cryogenics, like they get credit, like loyalty points or something that they can redeem at the end of their life? Like, what does that look like?
No, well, so you bring up a good point, because this actually goes into what Nick Szabo was doing, like, all through the 90s and whatnot with the smart contracts, right? So, because he's one of the people that I highlighted in what I wrote, into Hal Finney, Tim May, and David Chaum. And Nick Szabo, he's the one who created BitGold, which was basically, you didn't need the central bank's approval in order to, transact with BitGold, right? But then in 2001, at the fifth annual Extropian Institute, smart contract can help solve the problem of trust, right? Because it's trust. That's what it comes down to. But then, even in addition to that, Nick Szabo wrote about smart contract in 1993, and this is where, as early as 1994, he described smart contracts as computerized transaction program that executes the terms of a contract with the general objectives designed to satisfy the common contractual conditions, to minimize exceptions, whether they're accidental or malicious, and to eliminate the need for trusted intermediaries. And then the paper also extended to the concept of smart contracts to smart property, right? So smart property could be created by embedding smart contracts onto physical objects. Right? Basically, Nick wanted to embed all property with information about who owns it, everything. And then this was also the precursor to, which is, I guess, Bitcoin 2.0 or blockchain 2.0, which is what Ethereum is. And that's what Ethereum runs, and decentralized finance completely runs on micro-programs or smart contracts. So it's just interesting that this was all being like conceptualized like so long ago, and that the NSA is also involved, because we know with David Chaum, with that paper that the NSA wrote in 1993, that was very similar to the Bitcoin white paper released by Satoshi Nakamoto, that they referenced David Chaum in the NSA paper, and he was an extropian and like worked very closely with these people. So that's also another just little bit as far as the extropians go. Well, they extend a lot.
It's interesting that they try to like sideline that history largely, and then it starts with Satoshi Nakamoto, and then everyone just goes from there forward. I think even in Andreessen's thing, he didn't talk about the early history. Like the opening of his interview with Rogan was very much, oh, let me tell you about Plato. Let me tell you about Urbana-Champaign, the early days of tech. But then when he got to the crypto stuff, it was like, yep, Satoshi Nakamoto. And so the early smart contracts, that they don't talk about it. And they also don't talk about Scott Stornetta, who was at the MTA, the Mormon Transhumanist Conference. And the ledger that he created, which was an early precedent, was time stamping, right? It was the aspect of that ledger was a time-stamped document. And so I find it very interesting when you see people like Dalrymple talking about time and retroactive time and manipulation of time and data, like how that all works, because it seems to me that the timestamps are not just for the security aspect that they talk about it today, like, oh, we need to make sure we're not hackable for that fraction of a second. But there's something else I think that's embedded in the time stamping. And again, that reality that he was showing on that grid, the claim to territory, I mean, that language is very coded. You have a claim to a territory in the public space. They could just as easily dress that up as some sort of, Unity video game instead of a black and white grid and say, oh, here you've staked your claim in Decentraland for the public, for the credit of what happens here. So yeah, it starts to get blurry. It starts to get quite.
It does.
Well,
and that's where my frustration. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Jason.
Oh, I just saying the discussion about, the libertarianism, anarcho thing, they're all against getting government out of their lives, but what they're doing is creating a whole bunch of micro governments that, you're not going to be able to manage or whatever, and you don't really have any say over.
Yeah. And there's no one to really complain to something, because there's no liability, because they talk about the liability with these with these pharmaceutical companies, right? Because they're all against big pharma. They never talk about the biotech companies, by the way, which is hilarious, because that's kind of like big pharma is dead. Like I feel like this was like not that I'm a fan of big pharma, but this was a controlled demolition of that, of any credibility that they had. And I think that's what a lot of this health crisis that we've been going through is also a part of that, because it's kind of like, oh, well, big pharma can't do it. We're going to let these biotech companies, in a decentralized way, take over, right? And this outpatient care, and we don't need big hospitals. We don't need big this and big that. Everything is about localizing and decentralizing, but it's kind of like the same people doing it. So you're not really getting the quote unquote government out of your life. They're just going to have a different disguise and, sell it to you as like localism or regionalism or something like that. So that's also another thing that even in the quote unquote resistance space, where there's really not very much talk about the biotech companies, because that's the new big pharma. That's it. It's right there in your face. I mean, in Maryland alone, in a tiny little state like Maryland, we have over 500 biotech companies.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's replacing pharma though. I mean, I think it's an add-on. But yeah, that's definitely a major part of the new space for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, not necessarily replacing, as in like, big pharma's going to be gone. It's more of just a rebranding, I would call it. It's more of a decent pharma, but it's almost like it's safe to talk about big pharma now, right? Because it's like they have the lawsuits that are out now from what happened in Nigeria with certain companies and stuff, and it's like that stuff happened in the 90s. Like people already knew about that. Like, it's not new information. You know what I'm saying? It's like. But it's almost, it's like being presented as though it's, like, oh, we're finally, going to take down big pharma. It's like, yeah, okay, as if. Good luck with that.
Yeah. Well, I don't see big pharma going anywhere. I mean, they still have all their protections and they still have all their money and they still, I don't see big pharma going down. But
I think it's a personalized medicine. Like, I mean, the fact that Children's Health Defense has the Vaxonomics, like slide in their slide deck, like, come on, that's in there for a reason. We're just going to have the good evidence-based kind. And that's what VAERS is about too, is like tracking, right? Oh, we'll tell you when the bad things happen, and we'll make sure it's all personalized and the bad things don't.
And that's what Dr. Malone's job is. Like, I think before you got on, Alison, we were talking about Malone a little bit, and I think that's kind of what his job is as well, kind of like railing against the big pharma aspect of things, and it's kind of like, oh no, he's going to be pushing you to this biosecurity, constantly testing and precision medicine, right? With these like, oh, we just need more ivermectin and monoclonals.
Right. Big Pharma is Big Pharma is still incorporated into his solution, though. It's not. It's not we need to get rid of Big Pharma. It's like we need to do what, as Alison pointed out in the RFK book. Mismanaging. We just need to manage it better.
The next one will do better.
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering, now were the extropians also, was space part of that dialogue too, or was it just cryogenics, or was there like a colonization?
No, it's space as well. Yes, there was space colonization was a big part of that as well, for sure. Space colonization, it's whatever that even means, wherever the space that they're talking about is. I don't know if it's inward or outward, but that's a big part of their, I guess, MO as well.
Yeah. So, well, I feel like the space conversation is really linked to the cybernetic society, like planning. Mm-hmm. The idea of limited resources, the whole 1970s planet Earth sort of techno-environmentalism, like we're going to manage everything as this planetary computer as if it were a spaceship. And even if like there is no space or not getting into space, like the colonization thing is not, but normalizing it within the public sphere and to youth and to everyone, and also within the sort of Marvel superhero, which goes also with the biotech and some of the, again, even in that interview, Rogan's like, oh, superpowers, right? Like, I think there's something about the space narrative that is being leveraged into like accepting things that would otherwise be intolerable if you're doing it to like, be a good trooper astronaut, or like live small, live a certain way to fit yourself cybernetically so that we can manage all of the resources by consensus. And and then in the virtual reality, you can imagine yourself as having this alter ego.
I also
and
think
there's also the synthetic unity aspect of that too, like with the space things. It's like, oh, all the countries, we all have to come together and work on work on this together as well, because that's kind of one of the big things with NASA, right? Where it's like, oh, the scientists from all these different countries and they're coming together to save the world. Like we have to unite to save spaceship Earth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was thinking too, like I guess there's certain things that kind of repel. So with the whole conspiracy space, people looking at like power and what they're doing, and I also think there's times where they like things that affect our lives in the natural world. And so I think like even with the transhumanist thing that we went to, a lot of people are like, well, that's just some weird thing or whatever. But like, I don't know. I think that's I think that's an element of the narrative too. Like there's an effort to couple it with, you hide it in plain sight, but you also put some sort of like wacky thing in there that will like kind of, that's just nonsense, like even like the cryogenic thing,
like a poison the well.
Exactly, like kind of poison the well. So like, so people will like latch onto this one thing and not actually, see all these other things that are going on there too. So, I think that's.
I mean, do you feel like the Epstein is part of that somewhat, like the way in which that narrative is managed? Because it seems like, it touches on some of these elements, but it never bleeds over into the larger context. It just stays very limited.
Yeah,
with some of the more sordid aspects.
And also too, like the fact that the mainstream media, whenever the mainstream media is promoting a story. I'm always weary, and the way that they frame it, leaves out like huge, massively important chunks of the story, and doesn't connect it to other things. Doesn't connect. It's just kind of like, oh, this one guy that has too much money and power was taking advantage of people, and Ghislaine as well. But how many people know about Ghislaine's family, and the background? And even if they do, it's just a surface thing.
Or Roger's family.
Yeah, exactly.
Or not Ghislaine's, but the bigger picture. So I was going to ask, so Max Moore, was he the extropian Max Moore?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Max Moore was. He founded
when you were
the
writing
Extropian.
that he stepped away from the esoteric and like pivoted
Yes.
back to like hard science. And was he connected to UNICEF, did you say? Like, remind me that
Yes.
piece of it.
Yes. So
Okay.
UNICEF Africa specifically was they had ties to, or they like had a program through this thing called Friends of the UN that
Okay.
Still exists today, where they do a lot of like UN, publication of like media, and they kind of act as like intermediaries between like the schools and the legislators and with the UN. Also, education outreach with like high school kids and universities. And so UNICEF Africa like had its own website in, like, you can find it on the archives of the Extropian Institute website, where like UNICEF Africa, UNICEF Africa through Friends of the UN, and then Tanya, what's her name? Tanya Alcone, who still is if you look on her LinkedIn, she's currently the senior advisor of innovation for UNICEF, and she was directly associated with the Extropians. And then it kind of brings me back to something you've talked about a lot with the UNICEF Innovation Fund, which is all invested in like blockchain, AI, drones, and everything Extropian approved.
How child friendly.
It kind of makes sense. Exactly.
Yeah.
So like,
I mean, and it's
literally, Extropians are transhumanists. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, and
so
it's
to me, it's interesting.
Yeah.
What did you say?
No, I was just going to say it's based at Singularity University, like on the campus.
Exactly. Funded by Disney.
And who knows that? Right. The major funder is Disney,
people.
and I think Denmark, which I have a whole
thing
about
the government
refugees
of Denmark.
in Denmark. Yeah. And
refugees.
In some of that, I came across my friend who was a teacher in Maine. Her co-teacher, like a second grade teacher, brought in this program from UNICEF with wearables, and they were exercise wearables that were like, if the kids met their step counts, they would send food packages through UNICEF to people in need in Africa or something like that. And so it was like, you can see it with the lens of an impact market, that it was a double dip, right? You'd be like, oh, those fat kids in Maine need some exercise, and those starving kids in Africa need some food. And this is perfect. We can get data on all of them. And you talk about an entanglement, Jason, like literally this wearable entangles people. Like like, think about that crazy terrain and the credit, who gets pre-active credit for a social good, like on counts, right? You've done some good behavior and it's linked to some outcome like halfway across the world. And those wearables were actually underwritten by and branded through Lucas, like George Lucas, like Star Wars branded, and Target. So it's all of these major corporations that are building in like the control of young kids, but they frame it as like, oh, you're helping, you're a superhero. Look at you do those jumping jacks, like how. And one of the little boys just went up to my friend at one day, and they were like, like pulling at the sleeve, kind of like, but if they have the food, why don't they just give it to the kids? Literally, like the 8-year-old.
That would make logical sense, right?
Like, why? Couldn't they just give it to them? Like, that's the absurdity of this. But then you link it from that, which is absurd in of itself, all the way to transhumanism or like post-humanism to this like next phase. And then, so for me, when I look at what UNICEF Innovation is proposing by way of education for kids in Africa, literally pilots saying, there's never going to be money for those kids to have a school. Are you kidding me? There's never going to be enough teachers to teach those kids. They're going to learn in a VR headset. And you blend that with the charter cities movement and refugee management and remote labor, and you're like, they're training those kids to live in camps. And literally one of the other programs was oh gosh, I'm saying the word, but it was gestural coding. So they must have found some way of creating like a haptic motion that was not literate. They were sort of like, oh, they don't even need to learn how to read. We're just gonna like, they
can just nod their head and move their hands and move the metaverse.
And make,
they don't even have to learn.
If you simplify, it's Fordism, right? If you can simplify the coding down to sort of one very basic movement, like on an assembly line, and you just line the kids up and you make them do that, or you train them from a young age to be that. You know, and not to mention that UNICEF was connected with World Goodwill. And I know I don't know if it's you or Allie
Lucius
had
Trust.
done work into like, the Lucius Trust and Annie Besant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Alice Bailey as well.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That was, Annie Besant was also part of the Theosophical Society and whatnot. So she was actually really creepy. Yeah. But Allie did the really good breakdown of the Lucius Trust and Alice Bailey and all that. That's on Gloom, the little cynical corner over the Gloom. If anybody wants to check it out, I'll plug Allie's Alice Bailey breakdown. But no, that's actually a good point, and that's why like I thought the UNICEF connection was so integral, because it wasn't just like, you know, like you're now, right? Like you're dealing with like the education of like the youth, so when the humanist aspect to that, it goes to a very creepy place. So that's kind of why I also incorporated that. But to me, it's kind of like this is an evolution of what UNICEF pretty much is, rather than like maybe an aberration. So that's because some people are like, oh, this is just some random, you know, thing. It's like, no, it's not an aberration. This is part of the trajectory. It's very intentional. It's not, you know, it's not a surprise. It's not,
And I think it's part of the global citizenship. If you think about it, like I wasn't really ever very big back in the day, but I do remember those little boxes where you were supposed to go around and collect pennies and quarters on Halloween for UNICEF. Like, and that was getting kids. And again, I'm not a nationalist. Like I'm not wanting people to be antagonistic to people in other places, but it was implanting this idea that you have this obligation, which again, I'm not saying we don't have an obligation to one another, but like through this global NGO, right? Like you're manifesting your obligation through this apparatus, and then like do the wearables, like the Star Wars branded wearables, then is that the next step, right? Like you're not collecting quarters anymore. You're actually, through your behavior and this wearable tracking device, asserting your social connectedness. And I think that's all part of these social, like, you know, making your values visible to the machine.
It is. And I think that's also part of the, like, not to get back to the physics thing, but like that's part of the quantum entanglement, essentially, that they, like the energy capture and all that as well. I think there's something to be said there, even, you know, I don't want to get into the weeds with that, but I think that there is something to be said from the capturing of those types of interactions, because I think to a degree, it's not really about like making as much money as possible anymore. I mean, that's definitely an aspect of it, but it's also about like capturing the interactions. That's what they want, because you can't get that. You can't just like code that into the, you know, the general, what is it? The artificial general intelligence and whatnot. Like you can't just create that out of thin air. You know, you need like that raw, like very uncorrupted sort of data. And a lot of it comes from kids, because they're not conditioned yet. They're not engineered to, because it's they're pure. So, so you have a more authentic data than you would from like an adult, essentially. Which is, I think, why that the research that you do on like children is actually really, really, really important. So even if you don't have kids, because it comes for everybody at a certain point. And I'm not trying to sound, you know, sensationalist or anything, but I really do think that's an important thing, right? So
well, they say within a generation they can basically manufacture a whole new person. This is an idea that's been around for a very long time. You know, you can you know, one generation you can reshape you know, people's political beliefs, people's, you know, religious and you know, all their worldview, essentially. And so they're developing that. What was that?
Could I maybe pull up the Alpha Bond one? I think that there's an image from Leo's, because I think that's, as we're talking about the interactions, it's probably near the bottom, like the second half.
All right.
And that kind of goes into the terror bonds as well, right? Or not bonds, but the futures market with Robin Hanson.
Well, so
I remember Leo saying something about that.
And I have you guys' resolution that I'm sending to you kind of low, but if you need to read something, I can bump it up. I'm just, Sebs her quality was kind of jumping a little bit, so I'm trying to do something about that.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
not your
Yeah.
fault.
And maybe you could scroll through that, Jason, a little bit, because it's like that one actually is just the website off the Alpha Bonds. But maybe we could scroll through, and then maybe we could also pull up. I have another one with Leo's piece. So
just
he
put it
was
full
doing a lot of
screen
work.
here.
He's been looking at Cello and IXO Foundation and Ocean Protocol and the ways in which the impact data is being, gathered en masse, organized, pattern recognition for machine learning and AI. And that is something that Andreessen talked about in that interview with Rogan, was that, he downplayed the sentient AI part, but he says we're really good at like the linear algebra and the patterns and getting machines to the fact that they can get some good simulations and, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I think that's probably enough. And then maybe if we could pull up, I think there's one that Leo has. So Leo Saraceno is a writer with Silicon Icarus, Raul Diego's format. And he's been doing a long series on sort of blockchain and digital twins. And I don't know if it's Celo or CELO, looking at programmable finance, regenerative finance in the space. And
Is it this one?
I think there might just be a screenshot. Like it says
okay.
screenshot, like Wrench in the Gears. It should have a Wrench in the Gears extension. So this is part of the series, looking at, again, the most vulnerable people are the ones that get pulled in. And in some ways, I think settlements of displaced people who are contained, right? They're like not citizens of the new place. They're contained, are this really good test bed of a cybernetic society. And that's part of it. So this is just an image that was pulled from Leo's article that was talking about these alpha bonds, because what is done, and he explains it better than I can, but like with the way these tokens are issued for different regenerative finance projects, is that there's a bounding curve. There's some curve at the way the tokens are distributed that sort of manages their value. But in that space, the creation of these alpha bonds enables essentially the entities that have access to more information about conditions, about like on the ground conditions, are able to make better calls in terms of managing their relationship with the bond. The more information you have, the more likely you are to be able to manage these social impact finance deals in ways that are financially profitable to you. And so again, this is such complexity even for me, and I have a pretty good handle on how this works. To try to explain it to an everyday person, it just simply, it's overwhelming.
I had some quotes written down that were, about the alpha bonds, because I remember after reading that article, I took some notes, and I was like sending it to Leo, like, oh, what did you mean by this? And so I had some like stuff that I had written on that alpha bond specifically.
Yeah.
And this is from his article, and so alpha bonds are smart contracts based on like a financial instrument that describe the world's first cybernetic sustainable DeFi mechanism, right? Which is built on the internet's impact alpha bond. Which is built on the Internet of Impact. So, and then alpha bonds dynamically adjust the blockchain state in response to real world signals. So I guess they algorithmically, change, or
it's sensing.
I guess it's like self-referential.
Like
it's self-referential.
Yeah,
exactly. It's like the thing that, Jason, you always talk about, the SMART, right? It means like self-referential, like or I forgot what SMART stands for.
Self-monitoring and reporting.
Exactly. So that's kind of what this thing does algorithmically, and there's certain things that would trigger it, right? Depending on, I guess, like a task, that's finished, or incomplete, or what have you. So that helps the social impact investor manage their risk for their investment. So it's all about protecting the investor at the end of the day, and how they restructure these, alpha bonds. Yeah. But I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah. So it's this giant sensing organ of data. Now, I think to start with the refugee camps, like that's a relatively small use case, right? That's an easy place to start to refine these systems, to make sure everybody's got their digital ID, got their retinal scan, got their programmable money. And, in many respects, what I'm saying is they're trying to suppress the informal economy, anything that's like an off change. on the one hand, because they want to control the entire economic operation, but I think too, those exchanges represent value and potential well-being, like these metrics of well-being and the impact. And so anything that is like lost, that leaks out, is something that they can't feed into their machine. And so that's the thing that I find really challenging with people who just want to have this conversation and pretend it's about fiat money, right? Like, oh, this is about crypto versus fiat. I'm like, no. These tokens are so much more. Like, the idea of using them as some sort of like tethered dollar equivalent is just a really, I mean, right now it's a bigger use case than it will eventually be, but it's so much more. If you're not having the smart contract, cyber physical environment, well-being tracker conversation, compliance tracker, prediction market, you're not having the conversation. If you're not having the prediction market conversation, you're not actually having the conversation. You can wave your hands all around and call China's social credit score all you want, but until you're talking about this, you don't have your hand on the pulse of what's happening. So, which is, why I appreciate, because Leo has some more direct interface with how that actually works. Like, I look at that and I have a gut sense of the scope of it, but I don't know how all those tokens move around or what they, but I knew that that's how they would need.
I was going to say there was another part. So it was so to maximize the returns for the investors, they needed to figure out how to let investors bet against the project. And so that's where the bonding curves, I guess, would come in with those alpha bonds. And then the test scores and other data from the children's phones would create the verification proof showing the students have met the arbitrary benchmarks that have been set, right? And then that would automatically trigger a payout to the investors who purchased that tokenized bond. And all of this can happen in real time because, with all the interoperability and, just the tracking in real time, the signals intelligence, all of it is also very militarized. So that's kind of like, And then, as you always say, it's just like the putting it in that frame as well. Because like, this is coming out of the military. Just say that till your face turns blue.
Mark Andreessen, this is military technology.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm just sort of looking at the various. So I wanted to say on the betting stuff, and this is, I think, where like some of our struggle with the just small sort of fry people who are in the crypto space who imagine that they're going to do some social good with their crypto, right? Like Jason, a fair number of people that might fit that frame. If you said these bonding curves and these bets on people were all going to happen through, Goldman Sachs, people would not be having it, right? If you said, if everybody said that that's how it was going to happen, they were going to be, now that's the truth. I mean, the vast majority are going to be the BlackRock, State Street, UBS, running those. But if you can sell the little guy on the fact that they can change the world by gaming and making their good liquid democracy token transfers, right? That they can help the kid on the other side of the world with the whatever, like, their tokenized scholarship for their VR module, like in a sort of a gamified token environment, like that's where it's going to be. And I think that's where the commoning conversation comes in, and where the peer-to-peer, right? You can change you can help your peers, but it's all being transacted through the system. And so I wanted to mention, if we can maybe pull up, Jason, if you see the guy, the P2P Bowens guy, see if I have, it should be like around the middle, I think, of the page. And also like, his bio. So early on, and I recommend books sometimes, and these are books I read well before any of the lockdowns, but there are these two books by this guy, Daniel Suarez, and I won't say they're great literature. Like, the first one is pretty schlocky. I could totally see it being some Hollywood film, but conceptually at the time, like, I really wanted people to read these books so I could talk about them with them, because I was not fully disentangled from the political, like the partisan stuff at that point. And I'm like, I don't know what to make of these two books. And one was called Demon with an A, Daemon, and the follow-up is called Freedom. And so, and Daniel Suarez was a self-published systems administrator, and he was very entrenched in, like, he knew DARPA, decentralization, augmented reality, and I was reading these books in probably 2000, like 10 years ago. And they're very libertarian. And I kept saying, so in the frame, they were using this decentralized system to bring down global capital and set up Holon communities, which I thought was interesting because I don't know if it's Buterin's essay or whatever, it was liquid democracy and holography was the other one. And sociocracy, so this idea of these small cybernetic villages, like high-tech villages in this. And there was a review of this by Peer-to-Peer Foundation. And I knew it at the time because it was actually a very extensive review. And I was like, oh, this is helpful. But like, what is Peer-to-Peer Foundation? And so as I'm digging into the platform cooperatives and these like, anarcho-leaning cooperative spaces, I'm like, who is this guy, Michel Bauwens? Like, he's the founder of this in 2006. And most of the bios just would have a bit of information like, he's founded this in 2006 and now he lives in Thailand and he's, spearheading the cooperative, cybernetic cooperative movement. But this one actually talks about his actual, like in more detail, that essentially for 15 or more years, he worked for the U.S. Information Association, okay, which is essentially like, U.S. public policy abroad, but it's the propaganda arm. Like it's what like originally Nelson Rockefeller's like Cold War propaganda machine created. And so he was their cybrarian. He's like, I invented the word cybrarian, this is me. And he's Belgian. Like he was originally Belgian, which is interesting, right? And then he becomes the USIA's cybrarian and then also does side work for BP and in virtual information sharing and various e-commerce platforms and like interactive media and e-commerce. Right. And so this is the guy who's going to sell you on your liberatory cooperative on blockchain. Like these are the people who are behind, I think it was called like the Guerrilla Media Project, that these Spanish activists are going to translate your activist literature. But they need the cooperative angle because they've got to get everybody under their wing, right? They need the libertarians to feel like they're free, and they need the anarchists to feel like they're uplifting. Literally, this new model of the disco cooperative was the eco-feminist. Like they're going to build the well-being metrics and the care metrics because the tokens, they need those tokens to tell you what to care about. Like the AI doesn't know what to care about. If you put care work on a token, then you know what to care about or how to weight the caring, how to weight the well-being. And so I think until we pull back, who are these people? What is this peer-to-peer economy? Like, what is it all about?
How are they measuring this well-being? Like, you know what I mean? Where are these metrics coming from, right?
Exactly. It's like a petri dish. And I think a lot of the refugee communities are being used in very duplicitous ways. And, I mentioned yesterday, Cello is working with Charles Eisenstein, Mr. Sacred Economy, right? Cello has beautiful money. Their beautiful money is going to run a sacred economy, practically a gift economy on tokens, And so I think if we mix in the idea of UBI and, GameStop and gaming your way to saving the world with crypto tokens, that's the collectivism they're talking about, but they need us to buy in. So I don't know, Jason, do you have some thoughts? Because I know that you're more in that space due to some of the videography work you've done.
Yeah, for sure. And sorry if I'm a little distracted. I didn't get a chance to set this whole thing up the way I wanted to. I'm like, oh wait, I need to move this. I'm like kind of doing technical stuff here on the side.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
But I'm listening. I'm listening.
No, we were just talking about like the token.
Yeah. No,
participation.
I was listening. I kind of take issue with the whole framing of peer-to-peer. And that's why I think like the libertarians and anarchists get excited about it, because they're like, yeah, I want to be free and I want to interact with this person without any interference. It's just me and this person and whatever we want to do. But it's not that. Like that's the problem. It's not actually peer to peer. And then you get into, these voting systems and all the complications with that. So I don't know, like my introduction to peer came from torrenting. The BitTorrent, they came up with this thing where they would it was really a way to share files, large files amongst different groups of people. because of the bandwidth of the internet. It's hard to send a big, large file. But people started to use the supposedly peer-to-peer, but that would be my computer talking to your computer, and we're just sharing information with one another. There's nobody else involved.
Yeah.
And so like there's a whole community of people that were sharing, and some of the stuff they were sharing, industry didn't like. They didn't want Hollywood movies or whatever on there. But that idea, I really liked the idea of people being like, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to share, through this video and through documents and everything. We're trying to share amongst ourselves without it being manipulated. But then just realizing that, peer-to-peer isn't necessarily what, when I came into it, isn't necessarily what I thought it was. So I don't know, like my introduction to it is through torrenting, which is still, people are still sharing files. But if that technology,
I was thinking of like LimeWire. Do you remember? Or like, I guess Pirate Bay. Some people were saying Pirate Bay.
Yeah.
Mm.
BitTorrent, Pirate Bay. There's lots of Unix.
Napster.
Yeah, for sure.
Old.
See, to me, I just wonder how much of that, like knowing back in the 90s, like the people, the smart contract people knew what the future was, right? They knew. Actually, maybe we could pull up the Micah. What's his name? Micah White. There's a couple of images there. Because again, I was so naive. Like you have to get burned so many times before you're like, oh, like you start to get an education about how this actually really works. So like, I remember reading Micah White's book about sort of, again, like get outside of things, create your own towns and he came out of Occupy, and then like stumbling across this article saying like, oh, we're going to do it on crypto, and thinking, what? Like, where does that come from? And there's actually like a bio underneath that he's at World Economic Forum. So, like they're pitching the cybernetic liberation. And so you have to wonder, like, how organic were those movements? Like, again, not everyone, but how, like the catalyst for that, because
well,
they
I don't think we necessarily need to think of it as either or, because like sometimes both things can be existing. There, a technology comes out, and then a certain group of people start using it for their purposes that maybe wasn't necessarily intended. But then there's this other thing that was intended, and then maybe the powers that be incorporate this thing that started to happen maybe organically over here into their framework.
I mean, I think that the exchange sharing, they knew that this, like, the people in the NSA, the people like they've known that the plan is a Web 3.0 for a long time before the public knows, right? And like most average people have no idea if you said Web 3.0, like what it is. Like again, even in that Rogan interview, I think there was like a couple of references here or there, really no intention of unpacking for people to like understand what this really looks like or what it really means or what the investment value is for these companies that he backs. You're not meant to know. And so like, to me, when it feels like as soon as they understood cloud-based computing was coming, like they figured out ways of structuring the new digital reality, which again, the Negroponte book, what is it? Which is it? Being Digital?
Being Digital. Exactly.
Being Digital. Yeah. That like, I really want to spend some time on that. Like they knew that the new world was going to be digital. And they were going to structure and manage that world, but they have to do it with our participation. And so they need to weave a story or a framework that make it acceptable for people. And I'm not trying to cast shade, but I'm just saying, like, in retrospect, if you look back at the timeline, surely they knew what they were aiming to build. And so when I see things like Occupy, and you look and you see, oh, that one of the main people is now, Jason, there's a bio of him at the World Economic Forum on that link. And so like, I don't think he just got snatched up. It's a different link. Like, I don't think that this just, like, I feel like that was baked in. And a lot of what I've been working on, and I think you've done some similar work, Sebs, is around like this sociocracy and consensus voting, which I think is very much about the tokenization. And I think a lot of it actually goes back to the Quakers, which is something I feel like I have a responsibility to unpack being a Philadelphian and how integral the Quaker narrative is, because it's like the nice people, the quiet, plain people. And they're, yeah, sure, they have money and they're connected, but, you know, nice. And so that the ways in which those
They're anti-slavery.
social systems, yeah,
They're
exactly.
abolitionists. You know, it's like that's how you think about the Quakers.
Right, like there's these stories. And so you think about the story of Occupy, and really like they were test beds of social management. Like understanding who was probably embedded in those systems, like as an ongoing psychological experiment. Like, I mean,
I
John
got
Trudell
pretty,
actually.
I was out there in Philadelphia, you know, when Occupy was happening, and you know, at first I was like, this is so cool, you know, like you'd come down there, it's like, you know, everybody's just doing their, like people, I kind of reminded me a little bit of Burning Man, because Burning Man, people come together and they start to organize there's just like people building their camps, you know, there's this kind of like a natural, it's kind of cool to watch because there's no outside structure telling anybody what to do. So people are actually working together, and it's kind of neat to watch. But then I quickly realized, you know, just how managed that whole space was. There were people there that were steering it and managing it, and I really saw it when Sherry came down to speak, because I was running her campaign for sheriff, and like there were people trying to shut her down, and and just the messaging. There was a lot of steering going on with that whole situation. Yeah. So I became pretty jaded with it pretty quickly, and I was like, okay, you taking over City Hall, that's amazing. You guys are. But yeah, I think
and that's funny you say that, because oh, sorry, I was going to say that's funny you say that, because it almost seems like they set it up so that it could manage itself, and that kind of goes back to the thing I was talking to you about, Allison, I think yesterday, the P2P thing, or the peer-to-peer thing that I found, the peer-to-peer society, where they were talking about like stigmergic signaling, right? Like people, and I remember you talking about the stigmergy, where here, I'll read a little clip here. It's like the main allocation mechanism in such a project, which replaces the market, the hierarchy, and the democracy, is a distribution of tasks. Unlike the industrial model, there is no longer a division of labor between jobs, and the mutual coordination works through what scientists call stigmergic signaling. So it's essentially like, you know, like kind of without anybody having to tell you to do it, you kind of group yourself to complete a task that needs to be done that like you don't even necessarily, you didn't think of, you know, but it's just that you're put in this condition where that's kind of how you end up reacting. And it's this hive mind. There's a lot of like hive mind concepts kind of layered within that as well. But if you wanted to touch on that, because I think you have an interesting perspective on that.
Well, I was just going to say, like, part of what I was looking into a little bit was the what's his name? Stiglitz, Joseph Stiglitz, the economist. Like, he was involved in looking at this Mondragon Corporation as a tool to solve the, you know, inequality of capitalism, right? And so he's like, well, maybe it's this, right? He was involved in some pontifical academy with the Vatican, you know, on poverty and various things. And so, but I think what he won the Nobel Prize in economics for was the idea of asymmetrical information. And so the way in which markets were shaped by people not having equal access to information, right? And those inefficiencies. And so I feel like in some ways the tokenization and the making everything visible is about, like, in some ways dealing with inefficiencies. But then I'm also thinking a bit about like those black market cypherpunk, what was it? The
Blacknet.
I can't remember. Blacknet, yeah. Like, so
Blacknet, the 10 May.
Is actually like also built on secrecy, right? So there's both certain things being made visible, certain things being suppressed. You can use the technology for both. You can use the information for the alpha bonds. And then if your smart environments are shaping, like, it's a ubiquitous sensing thing of emotion, you can start to drive crowd behavior. Like, we see it online, like we see it in social media already, like the creation of swarm behavior in crowd environments online. And then I'm thinking in the school space, the focus on social emotional learning and learning behavior management apps and platforms. And those are mostly tokenized. And again, they go way back to like the idea of like tickets, like, oh, you get a ticket at the end of the week, your kindergarten teacher, you can like get some little thing, right? Or a homework pass or something like that. But now they're literally digital, and they're zinging people points. Like the teachers can zing points to wearable bracelets on kids, like this TaskRabbit program. And Google has it one further, because they have a behavior management system called Classcraft. That's like you have an avatar hero and you're in the game, and there are behavior management points, but it's not just you and the authority, it's your peer group. So if you do something bad, your peer group could collectively pool some of their points and give them to you to get you out of trouble or not.
Yes.
One of the things I think about when you say that real quick is just like how in like East Germany and like the Stasi, but how they actually did that. They actually got people to police each other, where they'd set up a system where they only had to do so much, but everyone was policing each other. And I think about the term community policing, that's kind of what we're talking about, is community policing amongst ourselves, get us to police each other. Anyway,
it's like an indirect like coordination mechanism. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say but you can create these vortices of emotional content. And that's, Lynn has shown talking about like what's that reality TV show where you get voted off the island, right? Like it's like these tokenized
God, my sister
votes.
watches that. Love Island. Yeah.
But
my
the
sister
idea of
that.
tokenized voting for everything, right? Radical participation. Like, what does radical participation mean?
You get voted out of housing.
Yeah. Well, Jason, could you pull up the one for the circle? Because that's the thing. And I forgot, like, I read this book a number of years ago, and I don't know what to make of it, because I think like Dave Eggers is sort of up there with Cory Doctorow. Like, I think they know the deal. And like when he came out with the book, The Circle, which is essentially like, a send up of Google, about this future world that's being created. And, it took me a while to realize The Circle is cybernetics, like the circular economy, the cybernetic economy, all of that. And he took flack for it at the time. But it was like, oh, he doesn't understand. But clearly he was very on target, like in terms of tracking and all of it. But within that, a key element was that you would have a logged identity, and everybody had to vote. And that you had, like, you were shamed, like you were really pressured in this voting space. And they called it democracy. And so, and I remember thinking for a while, like Facebook started to do that, like these voting ads, and the way like young people in high school are conditioned to like, get out the vote, register to vote. Like, and you meld this idea of radical voting and public shaming and their ability in the narrative of this story to create social movements through peer pressure, through voting. It just starts to feel really dangerous, especially if maybe some of the things you're voting on involves like people's lives and well-being, you could really vote on a lot of things.
Yeah, no, that's true. And it's also, a lot of this is facilitated through the civil society groups as well, who kind of posture as some sort of like a check on these like, the NGOs, because they're like, oh, the NGOs are, neoliberal. The civil societies, though, totally independent.
Yes.
So it's kind of like,
that's a really good,
it's like, where does it stop? Yeah. And that's where, and also to kind of add to, what's his name again? The Tillman, the guy who was also a transhumanist.
Yeah.
To Micah Tillman, he wrote a paper about doing a DARPA style civil society, project. And yes, and I'm like, what the hell? And because I recognize that, wait, you've talked about him from the transhumanist organization or, the conference, and he works for Anderson and Horowitz, right? So
Horowitz, yeah. I think he's now with their spinoff, like one of their spinoffs, but yeah, no, totally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So like digital democracy, right? Good AI, anti-racist AI, like they're all, and it's going to be fed into these impact metrics, right? Like how anti-racist is our AI now? It's, 7% less racist, but it's going to all be framed within like the digital democracy zone. And so like, you're not going to be allowed to say democracy's this is all
Exactly.
dysfunctional. I don't want to be in your circle.
I don't either. I don't want to be in your cones of, plausibilities or your circles of possibilities, right? It's like, or I just don't want to be in any. I would rather I will observe from the sidelines, like in the bleachers, just I want nothing to do with any of that. I wanted to bring up really quick about the in reference to the liquid democracy, that paper from Ethereum Foundation that was talking about the liquid democracy and the Lewis Carroll aspect
right,
of it,
right.
because he
I
was
think
the
I
one
have
who,
like,
yeah.
Jason, I might have a liquid democracy thing.
Yeah,
Actually, there's one that says like values.
Values.
Mhm.
Okay. Go ahead. I'll find it.
I don't know that it's exactly
Yeah.
the same link, but it mentions it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's two different ones.
But
Yeah, go ahead.
So he wrote this book, Lewis Carroll. I think that Lewis Carroll was his pen name, I believe. I think his real name was something Dodson, or what have you. So he wrote this,
Charles
Dodson, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Charles Dodson was who he wrote it as, but same guy. In 1884 is when he was talking about this liquid
So this
democracy.
has been around a while.
Exactly, and it's like, and this is being referenced by the Ethereum Foundation. When they're like talking about this,
They know.
DAOs and things. Yeah, like they know, and it's just. So he wrote a book titled "The Principles of Parliamentary Representation," and it's where a system where each vote or each voter casts a single vote, but they have the ability to transfer it and to allow another person to vote for them, which is basically a digital twin,
Right.
which we talked about. And I just wanted to add to that. In addition to that, so right after they mentioned this, the liquid democracy, they actually an example that they referenced right underneath that, and the name that they used in the example was Alice. Which I just thought was,
wow.
Yeah. So like right
Wow.
underneath, they came up with an example, and it was Alice, and he wrote Alice in Wonderland. So it's just and I remember you saying something about the
teapot, the first virtual object. Yeah. Yep. And there's a lot. I mean, there's like Alice is connected to CERN, and Jason, I think I actually have an Alice thing at the bottom. If you, yeah. So this is just like, this is a presentation, but I pulled this one up actually, just because one of the references, it said somebody back in the 60s was advocating about voting through your TV. They're like, this is great. Everybody can totally participate, and you can vote on a presidential debate on your TV, which again, they have later. So, again, part of my run-ins that I continually have with the blockchain crowd is that I came in the door of they want to put people as tokens on blockchain, which is
your run-ins on the blockchain. It's just, they just crack me up. I'm sorry. It's just the run-ins that you have with the crypto bros.
Soulbound token. There's a line. You're not stopping at soulbound token. And your specialty is esoterica. I don't know what to say. I just don't. But yeah, so this is besides blockchaining preschoolers in South Africa, the other use case, this was tied to the Alice SI protocol in England. And it you could bet on social programs like homelessness and different things. And it was a tokenized program. It was called Alice. It's I called it automated poverty management. It's connected to free markets. And I think the people who funded it, that it was the Nominet Trust, and the Nominet Trust was made up of money from IP address sales. So you can imagine with Internet of Everything, the people who are assigning the numbers, that's a lot of money. And there was a backdoor connection to Philadelphia through Comcast actually. But within this is idea that you can tokenize social welfare programs. And what was really interesting about the white paper that I linked to is this complex diagram. But essentially you can see at the bottom, it says the investment platform allows social organizations to launch appeals for impact investments in the form of loans. And the protocol tokenizes the investments, allowing investors to trade their positions on a secondary market. And that's the key, is the trading the positions on the secondary market, because these deals themselves are not terribly liquid. And so they need to make them, because literally they want to Aladdin's hedge fund trading machine. They want to trade them all the time. They're not going to wait 5 years until they decide how many unhoused people had their addiction issue resolved. Like that's not actually what the time frame is. And so the tokenization is what like creates the liquid investments, literally like liquid democracy, liquid people. And it is, Alice, was that people have asked me, well, where's your proof? And I'm like, well, they say the goal is asset-backed securities traded on global markets. Is it scaled yet? No, it's not scaled yet, but you don't write white papers about creating these global markets if you don't plan to do them, right? Like this is part of the plan. And there's another link, Jason, called Giving Unchained. I think it should be right around the same area. So this is like a white paper that's from 2015 that was literally talking about creating DAOs for impact markets on blockchain. And this was 2015 was this paper. And like, I encourage people to read it because, at the time, I kept thinking, and this is when I was primarily in working in the education space, but like what happens when Chan Zuckerberg, right, becomes a DAO? Like what happens when these giant pools of money or somebody's, insurance, or whatever, pension funds, the California Teachers Pension Fund or what, CalPERS, like what happens when you make that a DAO and you automate it and you put it on blockchain and you start feeding it into real life data streams? And then you start like enabling secondary markets and hedges against those markets and bonds. Like it gets dark really, really fast. And so like, and some of this stuff they were using things called colored coins, which is very interesting. I think I have another link to colored coins, Jason, but that they would use that particular term like Bitcoin, that you could embed additional metadata on them. And this is kind of before Ethereum became more commonly known in the public. But if you understand spectroscopy, like we've been talking a lot lately about colors and the use of colors to convey information, multi-channel, right? Exactly. So like, you scroll down, do you see colored coins? Can we just scroll up a tiny bit, Jason? Or is that,
I read a little bit about the colored coins on that Ethereum paper as well. It's interesting that you they were talking about that a little bit as far as like, oh, this is how you would make your own tokens. Like they give you, like a whole template for how to do that, and it was called like the colored coins. That's interesting. That's
right. But when you look back with a new set of information, you're like, wow, okay, the coloring scheme. And we know there's, other aspects of like racialized elements of coloring and, we've had the melanin conversation.
Yeah, we've had the melanin conversation.
Yeah. So it's, anyway, I feel like even though Jason's always saying like, Allison, you're all over the place. Like this stuff, I don't really like, eventually it connects, but in my brain, like I'm storing all of these.
Well, it's not that it doesn't connect. It's not that it doesn't connect. It's just like a lot of times we need like segues. It's in terms of storytelling. I've been studying storytelling, and so like if you jump to one other thing without the segue, sometimes it's hard for people to make the connection. And you're creating a tapestry here that if you spend enough time with it, you'll see how these things connect. But like. To the uninitiated or someone coming into this, like even your article, you're just like, wait, like from one sentence, like literally you have a paragraph, and the next paragraph you're talking about something totally different, and then people are like, wait, what? Like, how does that connect with this? So I think it's
like
not
the light right.
it's really just a matter of like figuring out a way to present it to where that thread or the spine is always present, like always connecting it back to like to me,
it's the mixed reality game.
Well, to me, it's the narrative is the artificial or the synthetic versus the natural. Like that's the best spine or the best thread
like
that
the anchoring point. Exactly.
For me, that's the anchoring point, because we're talking about all these artificial things as if they're natural. And as if they're organic or whatever. Yeah.
I have that too, where that's how my brain works, where I'm just kind of like, I'm like all over the place, and then eventually I'll like connect it together. Because even my dad will be like, you just talked about like 14 things that like, I don't know what you're saying. And I'm just like, no, but you don't get it. So I'm kind of, all over the place as well, just like very ADD with information, but then I'll eventually close the loop, but I might go on a couple of like segues and spirals.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, along the way.
Yeah, I do too. But Alison
this
took
one.
it to another level. But
Yeah,
This one goes to 11.
but it does connect. I mean, that's when
There's some people. I mean, we do have a group of people that like work that way though. So I do, it's not, it's nice to have a small group of collaborators who can kind of go there.
Yeah. No, it's nice. It's yeah. Steffers is definitely like that as well.
She's got a lot. Yeah, I say like I'm at a certain place, but there's people I work with that are even more. So I'm just looking and see. It feels like we've gone over a lot of stuff. Were there issues that you wanted to bring up from like either stuff we've talked about or the article that we haven't got to talk about yet?
No, I think I was trying to look at the list that we were gonna go over. I think we covered a lot of it. Let me see. I think we talked about Max Moore's esoteric move to hard science. Did talk about that.
But see, so my question though on that was like, do you think that he came into an awareness of the power of the first thing and then decided to redirect everyone else in the other direction? Like that's
a possibility. They gave very little information on that. It was more just like saying, oh well, when he was in college, he was even part of the what is it, this psychiatry or I'm sorry, the paranormal studies. What is it? Psychical studies or psychical club, like the club at his university, and kind of like exploring the esoteric realm. And then then suddenly he just realized that this isn't for him. He wants the hard science and empirical data, and he's an atomic materialist. So it was like an abrupt, this was happening, and then abruptly he shifted the other way and never looked back. According to his approved autobiography. So I just thought that was interesting that he was even exploring that realm. But that's a good point, though. He could have been like, oh, this is too powerful.
Well, or I'll do this on the side,
Mm-hmm. Like I'll do this privately, right? I'll do this privately, but then only talk about the empirical. Exactly. That actually seems more likely to me than.
If the goal is to generate enough data to be able to, through manipulating or curating that data, affect things in a metaphysical way, maybe it became a tool. Maybe hard science is the tool of metaphysics in some ways, or esoterics. Maybe the impact data or the entanglements or these things are ways of creating structures, around, because I still think that a lot of, what we were, some of the issues that are presenting around polarity, and again, even the extropian self-actualization, that kind of goes to the world brain idea and Huxley and Maslow, self-actualization, Esalen, the whole consciousness raising to this new evolutionary state, all of that stuff, that's in play. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's no way to prove it one way or the other, but I still am very intrigued by the whole, all of the assets of the continent of Africa and India in that equation. Because the thing is, this guy Bowens, he actually talks about the metaphysics of something relating to cooperative culture. He literally, the bio says metaphysics, and he's living in Chiang Mai, Thailand, which was the center of this kingdom with all of these amazing temples, which again reminds me of at one point in the clip, Lincoln Cannon with the Mormon Transhumanist Association, he says maybe you just don't recognize it as technology. Maybe you just don't recognize it as technology. This is the one about raising the dead. He's maybe you just don't see the technology. And, our friend Deepti in Goa was talking about the temples are they're sacred technologies. And so this guy doing the commenting, after his interactive media, I'm sure it's a beautiful place to live and all, but he just happens to be in the center. We know with all of what was going on, in Asia around the Tao and around mysticism and the yogis and shamanistic practice. Yes.
We take very real things.
For me, I'm still not totally convinced as far as how much of the metaphysical, you know, things that I would put into, like, some of it I would even put into mythological realm, is in actuality. Obviously, it affects our lives in terms of control, but like, the work that Stephen Newcomb does, in talking about these conceptual frameworks that are created, and then creating different conceptual frameworks doesn't necessarily mean that there's a foundation to the conceptual framework,
Well, we may not understand. I will just say this is so when I was looking at the foundation for the study of cycles, I'm not doing this quite right, and looking into that, and I need to spend some more time on it, but it was restructured. And this was, again, it was linked to this guy, Dewey, that Hoover set up to study the depression and the cycles, and literally they're waves. What you realize is that world is made up of waves at all different cycles. Like some are 8-year cycles, some are 3-year cycles. Like there's different ones, and they can be harmonized in this other space. And so this organization started in the 30s. This guy, Dewey, dedicated his life to it through the late 70s when he died. And it was based at Pitt, which the overlap with Reiser is very small. It was like at the end, it relocated to Pitt at the end of the 60s, and Reiser was just finishing up there. But same space. It fell apart, and then it became reconstructed by this new guy. And when he announced the rejuvenation of the organization, that had reincorporated, it had cleared off these issues of this guy who would run it into the ground or what have you. And he had 2 books in the blog post, like the feature image for the blog post. And one was a red book about cycles, like it looks like their own publication because they made all these publications. And then this was the other one, which was, I'll just read it. It says, Rediscovering the Integral Cosmos, Physics, Metaphysics, and Vertical Causality. So, that's a tell. That wasn't a clip art image. Like he specifically selected, and within the concept of the cycles, which was being largely used to manage investment portfolios, these hedge fund traders.
Yeah. I was going to say that the cycles, I was just going to add real quick, like the cycles that you're talking about, that's actually integral to the scenarios predictions that they do. And these alternative scenarios, and even the Institute of Noetics, right? Like, they'll insert a wild card, and a muted wild card that's not as bad, and a lot of this predictive stuff, like you were saying, it's all very much connected with the cycles research.
It's like math and its frequency, which is part of what we were talking about, like sound and music and all of it. But within this, he was saying, we're not just going to be doing markets anymore. Like, we want to go back to the original principles, and we were going to build a castle with these different things of stopping disease, stopping war, abundance. This new guy who is based in Florida is now this is the new thing. I can't remember the guy's name, but to me, that feels significant. Again, I can't prove it, Jason. I can't sit here and say here, let me, I've done this myself. But if you look at the people in power and what they're looking at, they are looking at the intersection of physics and data and frequency. And, the whole thing with the world sensorium, it's about heart and mind. I mean, and even Andreessen multiple times in that interview was talking about your gut biome and your thought process. He's mentioned that 2 or 3 times, which is kind of a lot given that most of that interview, he didn't say a whole lot.
Well, I don't dismiss it, by the way, like I said, I don't dismiss the possibility. But also too, there's so many different layers when you're trying to wrap your mind around this, because they're talking about, solving disease and doing all these great things, but there's another narrative that they're actually creating disease in order to then come back later and supposedly solve it, So I think there's a lot of deception, and there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of self-delusion that goes on in these spaces too. If you think about someone that has a lot of power, wealth or other, political or other kind of power, there's a lot to untangle there.
Yeah, it's a lot of double speak as well.
Right, and some of it's deliberate and conscious, and some of it's just paradoxical. Like, I think we're contradictory. We live in systems that, that contradict themselves, and we have ideas that contradict themselves. So yeah, it's not always easy to navigate.
No, for sure. But I guess it's like,
Yeah,
it just gets frustrating when like, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No.
Oh, I was going to say, it gets frustrating when, yes, like we do have certain contradictions and, but the thing is, like, if somebody points that out to you and then you recognize it, I don't know how you could excuse to continue doing the same thing. I think that's the main qualm that I have with that, as far as like, if something is being pointed out to you, then, and, you don't really have an argument for it, but then you kind of continue on with the original premise that you had. It's a little bit, and that's a lot of people though. That's a lot of, it's a lot of people who do that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were you saying, Alison?
No, I was just going to say, I think a lot of it has to do with the stories that we occupy about, like, that we inhabit. And that's, Cliff talks a lot about, like, what lens, what window are you looking out? Like, it's this reflection. And so that's why I feel like the information, like the propagandizing, like soft and hard of all of this stuff, and the access to information and the suppression of information, the uplifting of, is about the narrative crafting and like your personal narrative crafting. And that, for me, like, that's what was interesting, was to see the like the cooperative stuff come out, and the way that they were incorporating that into the blockchains and towards the post-human stuff, like these stupid tokens, and they're so complicated. Like, I don't even understand how anybody could, like, people don't understand the basics. Like, how are you going to throw something at them? Like, unless literally you're making it into a video game that they're accustomed to, and they'll just play the game. And they may not know anything about how the mechanics underlie it. They'll just play the game and live the consequences of the game. And the game that they're playing affects other people or affects the environment. That's how it's starting to feel to me. But I don't know, trying to explain it and get people's attention and to get them to really focus, or even to collaborate on figuring it out, is so hard.
Yeah. Well, Colorado's
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, just reminding, Colorado's going to be the Delaware of cooperatives.
Of cooperatives.
What were you saying, Sebs?
Oh, I was going to say, did you want to go over the being digital thing a little bit, as far as like what Negroponte's role in the MIT? Yeah.
Well, yeah, because you've got John and you've got Nicholas, right? So you've got these two powerful brothers, and one is manipulating sort of empire through the State Department in the real world for a long time, and strategic, right? Like policy and strategy and narrative shaping. And then you've got Nicholas, who's running, I don't know if he's running the MIT Media Lab. Was he running it at the time? Like,
he was one of the founders. It was him and another gentleman who was also part of the MIT, the RAD labs, the radiation labs. So that was kind of an interesting intersection there. And then, you have your, like, the Loomis family, the notorious Loomis family involved in that.
Yeah, Loomis,
but
brainwaves and
yeah, pretty much. But so Nicholas Negroponte, he was also part of the World Future Society, which was pretty big as far as like all these, like, you got your the Buckminster Fullers and Kofi Annan, right? Al Gore, like all these people part of this World Future Society, and out of like the Cuban Missile Crisis, essentially. But it's like this think tank about the future and how to envision the future, a better future, so they say. But Nicholas Negroponte wrote this book in, I want to say, 1995 or so, and it's called Being Digital. And in it, it talks about a lot of things that are like computer science-y, right? Computer science theory type thing. But the point that he made about the bits, I thought was pretty significant as far as like the bits of data kind of representing like the DNA of the information world, right? Because we're in the information age. And he even says like a bit has no color or size or weight. It could travel the speed of light. It is the smallest atomic element in the DNA of information. It is a state of being, on or off, true or false, up or down, white or black. Like, it can be everything at once.
The polarity,
Exactly.
The quantum, I guess that's the quantum. It's,
Yeah. And then, so basically, he's just making the point that like bits are really like the underlying particle of the digital computing, and that they're basically the DNA of information, and they kind of make up they're the digital representation of the physical world. So to me, that's like, oh, that's a digital twin.
That's the teapot.
That's like, that's your digital twin. Yeah, and it's just the way that he describes it is like fascinating to me. It's just
well, there's something,
and then he said something about MIT. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, like, so Richard Baldwin, I mean, a video I really wish people would watch, like literally I made it to a 2-minute clip. He talks about globalization 4.0, that it's the telepresence, like haptic remote robotic labor, and that the physics, literally the physics of the economy, because a lot of the economy is literally a simulation, right? Like it's a simulated model. So the physics, it really is, there is a physics of the economy, whether or not like it's real in the immediacy or making things real. And that the physics of the world of bits is different from atoms. I mean, Baldwin doesn't say it in the same way as Negroponte, but it was pretty much the same, that moving physical goods takes a certain amount of time, like whether you're putting it on a boat or an airplane or the postman is walking it to your house. There's a physicality to it where that doesn't exist in data. And so if we're primarily working through a platformed existence or through a remote robotic existence, that we don't have atom-based goods anymore, we have bit-based goods, that the fastness of that economy is like beyond what we can even comprehend, because it's instantaneous. And that it's more and more and more and more and harder and faster, because that's what capitalism is like. It's an atomizing force. Like you're making money out of every breakdown of every bit. So everything just gets pummeled, and we're not prepared. Like even Baldwin, he's like, yeah, like he's based out of Geneva, like some Institute of Economics in Geneva. It's like, nope, we're not prepared. And yet people across, like we're having many, many conversations, and none of them seem to be that conversation. And that is the being digital. Yeah, the twin and the economic implications.
Well, in terms of too, just for people that come from like Marxist analysis, there's always this discussion about the late stages of capitalism, and it's like, oh, they've run out of things, which clearly like they're running out of things to invest in, but within the digital space, it does seem like it's pretty unlimited. I mean, it's as far as your imagination can go.
It's infinite.
Well, that's what Romer says. Like he's like Paul Romer, that was his like endogenous growth theory. And I don't like have a handle on all of it, but he's like, knowledge and information is a non-rival good. Like, and I think somehow, and I don't know like how it's all connected, but Norway has this whole center for digital public goods. If you look it up, it's pretty intense. Like, and I don't know why it's in Norway other than whatever, Brundtland, Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Brazil Rio Summit UN lady, but it's in Norway, and they're talking about digital public goods. And so you can see how this cooperative structure, like a platform cooperative where you have these hyper certs for your participation, like talk about like a trophy, participation trophy, right? Like this is like the next level.
The real, like
everybody gets a token. Like you get a token and you get a token, like but on your permanent soul-bound, token layer.
Oprah
that's
tokens.
what this is. So but somehow he's saying that if they're non-rival in the digital realm, that you can have this exponential growth. But clearly they're going to make a way that somebody's making more money than other people. So it's going to be managed, I guess, in how you're investing in the public goods. And that will be how the people will make more money than regular people.
Yeah.
I don't have
but it's still going to be the same. Yeah. But it's still going to be the same people. It's kind of like that thing that Buterin was out saying, like, oh, if we do this kind of voting system, or if we do this kind of, a political system, then more people, the people who are predicting the right things, will have more say, than the people who are losing money because they're not predicting, the policies that are going to work or not. So it's almost like, how is this any different than like because if you have insider knowledge, like you're going to be way ahead. So this is going to be the same system we already have.
Right.
Just kind of.
And that's the thing that was so. Striking to me about the Alpha Bond conversation, because like when I was looking at the social impact bond in South Carolina, which was the prenatal one with Nurse Family Partnership. And again, they were putting women on Medicaid who were pregnant on behavior tracking apps, right? So this is like when you're hysterical about social credit scoring, like this stuff is already in play. And this was Hope Lab, Pam Omidyar, Pierre Omidyar's wife, Pam, like developed the app. Goal Mama, right? Because I literally remember standing in a room at Penn arguing with Penn sociologists that like poverty doesn't get solved with an app, like with a well-timed but digital nudge. Like, and they're saying, well, maybe it could, you know, like if they get their little tumbler of wine. I'm like, no, it doesn't. But one of the main investors in that program was Google. Okay. So like you put that lens, you look at Google taking over all of the schools, you know, all of the drives, Google Drive, Google email addresses, all of it. Like we gave it all away before we understood what it was.
Yeah. Oh, you know, speaking of Google also, I just want to put this out there. Google also experimented with a liquid democracy within their own corporate social media. So they were one of, it was called like Google Votes. I think it was what it was called. I have
what were they voting on?
Just basically stuff that was happening within their company, like, or within their section of the company, where they'll, you know, they'll vote for it or they'll give the responsibility of the vote to, you know, somebody else. And they were kind of experimenting in like a little microcosm of this like liquid democracy thing. And then another place that was also involved with or had like a pilot of this liquid democracy was in Argentina. They also had a pilot program there. Wow. In Argentina. So Argentina is an interesting little place. Not that little, but you know what I mean. Just you don't really think about it. You know, it's not really thought of as like a world player. But
they're significant. I mean, I think that what happened with their economy and the hyperinflation, like, definitely needs to be looked at, because it was, you know, I've got documentaries where there are people were just like doing rushes on the banks. People are running through the store because like they were going through and changing the prices, as you know, and so like people were trying to buy the stuff before they changed the prices on things. I mean, it's crazy, like what happened in Argentina. So, and I think these end up being test beds, you know, like
they do.
Point,
So they were the liquid democracy, I guess, pilot that they were trying. It was called Democracy OS, and it was founded by a team of like programmers, activists, and social scientists. And it was technically inspired by the Pirate Party in Sweden and Germany, right? So it was all about open government.
Yeah, I've seen
Open
a lot
Democracy
about
did a whole piece on it.
Yeah, I can't remember the woman's name.
Pirates. Just pirates are not a good role model.
I filmed the public banking conference several years ago in where was it? In California. What's the little town above San Francisco? Anyway,
Sacramento?
No, it's right above San Francisco. Anyways, it's right over the bridge. But the woman from the Pirate Party, Brigitte, anybody remember her name? She spoke at the public banking conference, and we've talked about this, and I want to dig more into it because you mentioned that
I think the public banking thing is really
it's being pulled
into.
You
made that point yesterday. That was interesting.
I support the idea in a general sense of having a public bank, like, but yeah, I think that they're definitely being captured, and but
I mean, they'll probably give you tokens to vote on how to use the public bank, right? Like that's probably, because really what they want is the social transaction data and the values and the well-being. Like this AI thing is trying to learn how to be like, what makes us tick? Like, and it's running through all of these different permutations to see how you react. And
Brigitte John's daughter was her name.
Okay.
I feel like it's like the Green Party. You know, I for a while thought it was something beyond what it actually is. You know,
well, it was
like,
interesting.
Me too.
I've been to
Jill Stein. 2016, guilty.
I've been to all the public banking conferences, and it was kind of a weird mix. Kind of, you'd have these like libertarian people, and then these Green Party people, and then jaded, you know, mainstream party people. So it was kind of a weird mix of people initially. So I don't know where it's at. I haven't been involved with them in a few years. So, but yeah.
Well, I think like it's interesting. I was just gonna say Andreessen's thing yesterday, like, or his interview with Rogan, whatever, recent this week, like, I think he was accurate in terms of that we don't have a lot of established social structures, like in terms of civil society. You know, you don't get a job and keep it for most of your life, right? You don't, like, people move around, people, like, a lot of the civil infrastructure is gone. So the way in which we form our identity is more fragile, and people are clinging on in maybe ways that are not healthy to things that aren't terribly helpful. And I think that belonging is really central. And I can see that the tokens, like, will be sold to people as a belongingness or a match, like like dating apps or, friend apps or something, like, show me your tokens and I'll show you who your friend should be, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And there were actually, like, I do think that the stories, like the science fiction stories, tell us a lot. And there were quite a few in, I think, the MIT Technology magazine and Slate. There were a couple, but one of them actually was maybe written 4 or 5 years ago about a couple that got a divorce. Like, something happened, but it was all on smart contracts, like everything. And the woman was trying to go after to kill an automated car. And so it wasn't clear until you got towards the end why this woman wanted to run this car. It was like in Estonia, like into an icy lake. And like all of the tracking mechanisms of the car and how they were trying to, like, figure it out. But that, like, the ride sharing app was acclimated to, like, I think they got better tips if the people, it was like a multi ride sharing, like, several people would get in the car that didn't necessarily know each other, and that you would get a better tip if the people in the car were happy with each other, like in a good mood, like maybe they would chat each other up. I guess this is a society where people didn't have their own cars, and so they were regularly carpooling. And essentially all of this smart systems were set up to, like, precipitate affairs, like to, like, match make through the ride sharing programs and, like, break up people's marriages to create, like, tips for the smart car. And so, like, I guess I'm just saying, like, I know it sounds ridiculous, but, like, they've already had these thought experiments, like, of how this was going to go, like, and the consequences. And again, all of it was automated.
Like, think of Uber. Yeah, but think of Uber, because it could kind of, like, miss whoever, because I'm thinking of, like, Uber group ride, or what is it, Uber share, right?
Yes, that's
where it could, like, tell a driver to, like, go, okay, go pick up this person, now go pick up this person, because it's not like the driver is necessarily picking, it's like it's all being done through this algorithm.
And I don't even think this might have been an autonomous vehicle in this scenario. Like, there might not have even been a driver trying to person in the car, like they were just trying to kill the car. But but all of the process of, like, their divorce and their settlements, everything was automated on smart contract law, which is everything, like, I'm seeing, like, we go to the Mormon transhumanists and they're like, hey, we can live in a charter city and have, like, blockchain smart contract law and all of these things. And no one's even having the conversations. Like, nobody even knows enough to even have the conversations. How can you even pretend to have a democracy if people don't even fundamentally understand the world that's being built? Like, it's hard.
Yeah, no, exactly. It is.
I'll see if I can find,
because they were like, oh, well, yeah, please. People. That's why it gets frustrating when they're like, oh, well, you're not really talking about solutions. Like, you're a Debbie Downer, or like a negative Nancy, or you just want to poke at this and that, and it's kind of like, well, do you know what the problem is? Because it's like, well, I'm talking about this because I feel like maybe this isn't being addressed a certain way. It's not necessarily because I'm, like, against solutions. I know it says that I am against solutions on our doom and gloom page, but that's more of a joke. But it's no solutions here. But I don't know. It's just it kind of gets. It's almost a way to, like, shut people down a little bit. It's like, oh, if you don't have your own solution, or if you're not offering something, like, then why are you talking? It's like, I don't because I have free will. Like, I don't because I want to, and I will. So
understanding the problem is part of the solution, and so, like.
Yes.
It's just an avoidance. It's that people don't want to think about it. They don't want to take the time. They don't want to study it. They don't want to be bothered with it. That's really what it's about. It's not even about solutions. I think it's just a cop-out answer, honestly.
Yeah, it's very lazy. It's a lazy way to address something. But it's or if you don't understand every, like, technical aspect of blockchain, didn't have a master's in computer science, and, like, you can't just like the token economy, as if I don't need that in order to, discuss these things. I can look into it myself and, so
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just,
But I mean, I would
it's
say
just kinda
even
hard.
within the resistance space, there was like, I was willing to give them a year to figure out the digital identity stuff and like how it was connected with health passports. And the conversation could happen. Like I was willing to be relatively patient, but like when it went from like, okay, now we understand health passports to we're making about China or making about these other things. And we're not actually going to talk about Silicon Valley. And we're not going to talk about Austin. And we're not going to talk about smart cities. We're just not going to talk about anything other than in this superficial way. And it goes on for a year and a half after that. And I'm just like, at this point, my patience is really thin, especially for people who are making livelihoods out of supposedly telling people the truth. When you've got jokers like Eisenstein selling beautiful money as a sacred gift economy and like writing heartfelt essays about like fawn hearts, people eating fawn hearts and connecting with nature. Like it's so over the top and that people go along. Like that people are enablers to this. Like literally, dude, like, I mean, there's some lines that should not be crossed. One of them is like surveilling toddlers by putting sensors in their shoes and having AI cameras like on the ceilings of the schools. If you want to hang out with people, like literally do podcasts and lend your brand to that guy, Sep Kambar, the head of Google's PageRank algorithm, you don't actually also get to pretend that you care about like nature over the digital enclosure. You just don't.
Yeah. You can't have it both ways. Like you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't. It's just, that's not how it works. It's not. And don't get mad at, the people who are pointing out at the inconsistencies or pointing them out to you just because you don't want to deal with it. That's kind of essentially, unless you're just like an idiot, right? And no offense, I'm not, not trying to be inflammatory, but
if Lynn were here, we could do a song together. Instead of diamonds on the soles of her shoes, it would be sensors on the soles of her shoes. Lynn, if you're watching, song idea. A little Paul Simon.
Yeah,
it's completely insane.
Oh, man.
Well, I appreciate your hard line, Allison. Although I wish you were a little more patient with people that aren't getting it, but I get it.
Well, sometimes it just gets frustrating where it's like, I don't know, you have people, interaction that you had with Greg, like I skimmed through a little bit of it as far as the Ethereum, and I just don't understand why it went to like, oh, well, you think fiat is better? And it's like, really, Greg? Like you're better than that, man.
Strategy. I mean, and again, like I wasn't going looking for that, but like his post was originally like, who is figuring this out? And you can't have .eth by your name and actually say that you want to figure it out, because that's essentially pretending the digital enclosure isn't real. You're not going to get at the truth with that. Like, I mean, you're just not. So
you'll get at like little bits of the truth, but not, the core of the weak incentive to not go there, because that's,
I mean, to me, if you're promoting that, you need to have a very firm position on smart contracts. Like literally the response could have been, oh, I've thought about soulbound tokens. Oh, I'm not, like the answer is never, oh, I'm concerned about XYZ thing. Yeah, you're right. This is how I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. They just pretend that isn't, like they just don't engage on that content at all. Which is at this stage of the game is really irresponsible. And, I feel bad. I think at some point they said, oh, they brought my kid into it. I'm like, you know what? I represent myself as a mom in this fight because I'm not doing this just for me. Like we're kind of grist for the mill, honestly, the people my age. I'm doing it for the people who can't consent. And he publicly has shared like his new fatherhood journey a bit, on there. So
he talks about it on his show. Yeah.
I mean, like that's your identity. If your identity is a new dad and you live in the state that's a bleeding edge for this, you actually need to figure out what you're going to tell your kid someday.
Well, and also too,
because at this point, you can't say you don't know.
Right. Well, and also too, like obviously there are conflicts between the need to make money so you can pay your rent and buy food and take care of your family, and so if someone's using crypto as a means to do that, if you're going to do that, at least be honest about it and recognize, okay, this is problematic, but I'm doing it. I've thought it out and I'm doing it. It's like, because you know, I think I can make some money and help my family. Just be open and honest about it. Talk about it. Like I have no problem with talking about even the technology that I use, the problems with it, ecological and economically as well. I still use it,
I would say there's another
I at least
level.
acknowledge it. Yeah.
Putting it next to your name.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing to run a business and have on your payment page, you take some kinds of crypto, whatever. You know, I'm not policing everybody on that, but literally if your digital identity is linked to .eth, like you're freely advertising for them. Like you're just that is an endorsement as far as I can tell. Like you can't read it any other way than I am endorsing this technology. And Ethereum is the technology of enclosures, period. I mean, it is.
I mean, it's the same thing with, I mean, if you, just because I use, you know, the dollars or fiat, it doesn't mean that I can't criticize fiat, right? It's the same thing. I don't understand why it can't be, but I don't have, you know, the Federal Reserve, like, next to my name. Like, Jerome Powell. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a little weird because it's the same thing. It's like, it's a little weird. It's kind of cultish. That's the part that,
I mean, maybe people can always change, but I would say that the challenge is that they've created identities, and the identity within the people who are in the crypto space is really strong. Like I think there's an energetic hold there. I think there's an incredible peer hold there. There's a financial hold there. There's lots of layers. And so if you decide to step back from that, that's
and identity and community is a huge piece of that. Like I said, I've been involved with that space, and there are identities and communities that are formed that are really strong within that space.
Yeah. And they know. I mean, I think that there is an energetic hold that's built into these token transfers, like entanglements. There are definite entanglements.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the reason why everyone who got censored, right, and kind of got shoved into these other, you know, different silos, whether it be Rockfin and what have you, it's almost like it's like a psychological thing where they're like, oh, well, you know, look at what YouTube is doing. Like, look at how operating within the fiat system has worked out for. This is why I'm over here, and now you're attacking me because I had to find a different way to make money. And it's kind of like, no, like that's not it. Like, I'm just trying to point out certain very basic things, and I don't know. I don't know why it's a problem to criticize the money or currency that you use. I mean, we criticize the dollar all the time.
And it doesn't mean that, like, I mean, obviously, we all are in this system, and you can't even, it's been built in such a way that you can't survive without, you know, compromising here and there. But like, we need to be able to talk about it.
But what isn't being said is the impact. Like, very few people are interrogating markets and behavioral data. Very few people. I mean, at this point, it's a handful of us, right? And so, and it's not like people don't know. You know, it's been like the big, you know, and it wasn't like I was wanting lots of credit for it. Anybody could have picked up my information and used it and built off of it. I mean, I'm not lying. It's, you know, it's there. It's free for the use. I'm not asking for any tokens in exchange for putting this out there, but the silence at this point is deafening. If you can't like uncover how your social credit system isn't just some ephemeral, vague thing, but actually is built into markets of capital and blockchain economics, tokenomics, and the feeding, you missed the boat. Like, you missed the whole boat. And you know, it's just, I feel like it continues to be a popularity contest of people who are mostly consuming entertainment, you know, like they want to be entertained, but they're not putting in the time to empower themselves. I'm not saying believe me. You don't have to believe me. Like, I have a lot of primary source material. Make up your own mind.
Yeah.
Somebody said,
and you shouldn't believe anybody, really. You should don't
believe me.
You know, yourself. Yeah, like that's
know
it
yourself. Know it yourself.
Yeah.
It has
have
to
your
come
own
through your own
feeling about
thinking.
Yeah.
If it doesn't come
I think
through your
that's
own thinking, it doesn't mean anything. If you can't own life and like really synthesize through your own like channels, then it means nothing. It's meaningless. Then you're just repeating rhetoric that has no like actual connection to your heart or, you know, your mind. So it just.
And the thing that I think is amazing about this is that it touches everybody. like across all dimensions, right? This is food, this is housing, this is nature, this is education, this is health, this is all the things. So with the lens you bring, like you can, once you understand the basic mechanics, you can enrich our understanding of it, right? Like I remember going into like an MLK Day event with Sherry and presenting on this 3 or 4 years ago with people who were in and out of shelter systems. And they knew, like couldn't maybe articulate every word of it, but they were like, oh, this explains why it happens like this. Like, this is when I go to my caseworker, this is why they do that.
Yeah.
Like they understood the mechanics in a way I couldn't, because that wasn't my direct experience, but they knew. And so imagine if we all were participating in that way, right? Like, oh, I do, I work in forestry, or I do this. Like, so the lens I have can apply, oh, that's why the monitors and the drones, like it's, I mean, there's so much potential if we
get to give you an angle. Yeah.
Yes.
You can get all the different angles in order to get a more cohesive story, because everyone's going to bring their own experience to it, and like everyone's experience is valued. You know what I mean? So it's just, and it's not, and not dismissing people either based on like, oh, you can't speak on, you don't, you're a white woman, you can't speak on this, or like, oh, you come from, I've been told myself, it's like, oh, you come from you're privileged, so you can't say this and that, and it's kind of like, it's like, that's not fair. You can't dismiss people based on like stuff that they didn't really choose. It's I don't know. It's not really fair. So I think
and reality is reality, regardless of who says it.
Exactly.
Like even if Donald Trump came out and said social impact finance is not a good thing for society, would we all be like, oh, maybe it is a good thing? Just like it doesn't matter whether he said it or not. Like the reality is there's a problem here. It's regardless of who says it.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Somebody made a comment on here. I think that thinking about the soul token is a luxury. Yes, Jason. So I wouldn't say it's a luxury. I don't know if that was what I was saying, but like the idea that like if we're going to take our time to think about these things, but actually the soul token is actually really important to think about, because it's going to affect our lives. But even thinking about money in general and like where it comes from, is
I wasn't clear on what that meant. Like
I'm not exactly clear on what it meant. So like EW, if you could clarify, because I just saw that and I didn't quite, initially I was just thinking that like they were saying that like it's a luxury to be able to take the time to actually think about these larger issues, or that the soul token is not really important. So if you want to clarify EW, I'd be curious.
I mean, but part of it, I think, and again, this speaks to what you were saying, Sebs, is like, oh, if people are in a certain positionality in the machine that they have access to more time or resources to do the work, like somehow that should make it invalid, right? Like, because what, and I've had that.
Yeah, you're not struggling.
Like, if the people who are the most, like under the boot of this thing, you can't, I'm not saying that they don't have the capacity to intellectually, and they definitely do. In fact, they understand it in a much more visceral way than a lot of us, but they don't have access to the time or just like the calmness of doing this level of research. So, and again, I'm not saying that you necessarily have to know all the stuff I know to be active. Like, I do think a lot of it is energetic. It's about intention. It's about having clarity. Like, I hope the gift I can do is to do the landscape of what this thing is. And that's what I'm offering. People can pick it up or not. Most people don't.
So they made an extra comment. Some people are just working so hard, they literally can't figure out how to pay their loans. My partner works, and I'm on the computer right now while he's a slave to his loans as a Freemason, working with stone and running his one business, a business that he won.
Yeah.
So anyways, I guess that's the idea, is like a lot of people don't have it. And there's some truth to that. Like most people don't have the extra time, and the little bit extra time they have, they don't want to expend on these deeper, heavier things.
I'm mostly saying like people who have committing time to learn things. Like there is like within the past 2 years, and I wasn't part of this world before, but people who are online and spend a lot of time online searching, like trying to put pieces together, right?
You're already doing it.
Like we're here. And so I think just what the wall I've hit is like after 2.5 years, there's not actually inclination to want to know the key pieces, which really do center people who are the most marginalized, because they're the test beds. These are the refugees. These are little kids in Head Start. These are unhoused people. These are people suffering from addiction. Like, I don't really see a ton of people in the resistance space centering. And I'm not saying that I can embody that experience. I can't. But I know when it's wrong. And I can say this is wrong and we shouldn't be doing it. And actually, those of us who are in a position of saying it's wrong should. Because what does it help anything for us to like look the other way and pretend it's not happening? Like,
Well,
what if God is out there saying, when you see it, do you do something or not?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is like my boyfriend brings up all the time. But like, we're not in Yemen being bombed, but do you know that's wrong? You know what I mean? Like, you can understand that that's wrong. It doesn't have to necessarily be happening to you to be like, oh, you know, like to understand that like that's wrong, that shouldn't be done. Like, it shouldn't be, you know, droning people or, you know, just kind of, to me, that's just pretty simple. So it's kind of like, you don't have to have lived in with certain, you have to have experienced exactly the same type of suffering that certain people have in order to understand that it's wrong. Like, that's what empathy is for. Like, that's a lot deeper than just, you know, having to have experienced it. I'm not saying that that's, you know, of course I'm never going to know exactly what it feels like, but I can acknowledge that like it's wrong. And I think that's okay. And I think to dismiss people like based on that, and I think that's wrong. I think that's in itself is like pompous, you know, in its own right. And I don't like that. And I have no patience for that at this point, where it's kind of like, well, you have no right to talk. Well, you're comfortable. It's like, okay. And I just saw something in the comments there that was kind of like, yeah, making that.
Well, and
point,
also,
so,
but the point you made, Alison, about people are already spending an enormous amount of time looking into different things, and yet they won't see the bigger picture. Like, you're already, you know, I had this thing with like years ago with the climate, you know, people, environmentalists and poverty, whatever. I'm like, oh my God, you can't, the money thing, you can't do anything without like dealing with this. And like, people just would not look at it. I'm like, this is the source of so much of the problems here. And they will not look at it. Like, they wanted to.
Well, and now they're going to say they'll fix the money with the crypto, only the crypto is tokens for behavior, right? And so we're not going to understand that the tokens are really data about social transactions and values. Mm-hmm. Like, for God's sake, we haven't figured out the old money version. Now we're going to get a whole new one, a whole new markets and like speculation, and where we never figured out the old stuff.
Well, you can't talk about money either from like, it's not like I'm trying to think how to word this. It's like an abstract thing. It's not, to understand what it is. It's not like a technology. Like, oh, we need better mechanics. You know, we need a better structure of it, because this is a different structure of it, but it still serves a similar function, which is to determine what has value, what doesn't have value. It direct people, you know, in this direction or that direction. Not in a self-directed way that people think it is. So yeah, I mean, the money's about to change, but even to have that conversation, another conversation needs to happen about just the whole general like construct of money itself and markets, you know, and how we, you know, relationship, you know. I didn't explain that well, but.
No, I think I've heard you talk in a couple of other shows as well about the concept of money and how it's very misunderstood even by the people who claim to.
Well, even me, I'm still trying to figure out how to articulate it. You know, like I still don't even know how to articulate it. But I saw a long time ago that there's this artificial thing that like affects us, like possesses us in many ways, in a weird, like, from a metaphorical way, but it's not what we're told it is. It came out of religion,
like the I mean, consumer culture, right? Because that's a huge, like, disposable that you identify through how you use your money. I mean, not everyone, but like the at least US culture is sort of like you craft your identity by your acquisitions or the way in which you disperse money or your charity or what have you. Like, and that I think is going to be a central part of the social impact space is like, even UBI, you'll probably get a tiny bit that you're supposed to give away. And then they'll know based on how you, oh, are you an animal rights person? Oh, do you care about, you know, people in this country? Oh, like, do you care about food justice? Like, show us through the tokens where you're, because you can't love, you know, you can't be for everything. So like, which 5 things are you? And they're going to want that. They need that liquidity in there. You know, one of the things that I was looking at for the liquid democracy, it was like the Center for like altruism or creative altruism or something like that. Like, it's, you know, you just keep pulling these threads and you're like, oh, not another thing.
Someone said, I don't understand money. Someone said it's energy, a reflection of your emotions. And again, even that, it's not, it's money is, there's nothing natural about money. Money is not natural. And Eisenstein likes to talk about money like it's just a natural reflection of our, you know, Eisenstein makes that kind of whole, money is just energy and we need to direct it better and we need to, you know, organize it better. It's a total unnatural thing. Like it's a total artificial constructed thing that actually shapes and directs society in an unnatural way. So, but like even going back to your comment, I can't remember which one of you were talking about, like, why don't we just give them food? You're like, no, you can't do anything outside this artificial construct, which you don't have control over, by the way. Like it's, you know, yeah, it's a totally different framing, you know, way to look at the world. You know, the market ideology and money and economics has replaced like our way of like our thought processes. We can't even, just like the woman with the fungi, you know, she's talking about these interactions that happen amongst, you know, in the forest amongst fungal and trees and different things. And like, it's a poker game, like it's an economic, this is an, you know, economic thing. Now, certainly there's exchanges and you know, there's some truth to that, but that's not really, you know, like, that's not really what's going on. I don't think.
No,
you know, I think
she took it to domination. Basically, she was like, "How do we harness?" And like,
yeah, you know. It's everyone's self-interested, and we're all just trying to get the best. You know, there's an ideology there that I don't think is accurate about the natural world. You know,
she doesn't actually understand fungal networks.
They don't use tokens.
Exactly. They don't use tokens.
They're going to use tokens. Well, I mean, the other piece on the money, though, I think, like in looking at the Templeton Foundation, I think, Sebs, you had some links to him, or you bumped into him, like he's now dead. But
I did.
Templeton, it's this set of mutual funds, right? And I think he might have been Presbyterian, but his foundation, which he has several actually, is investing in like character education, free markets, genius, and production, and theoretical physics and religion. Like there's a whole religion thing. And so one of the people that I was researching won the Templeton Prize in like progression in religion, which was handed out at the Guildhall, which is the ceremonial center for the City and Corporation of London, which is quite interesting. It was like Prince Philip was there. This woman got the Templeton Prize at the Guildhall, right? So for this religion. And so clearly it feels like also people's faith practice, which is a bit related to the energetics, has been wrapped up in money for a really long time, right? And I think like debt and indebtedness, spiritual indebtedness, you know, if you don't do all of the right things, you're going to end up in purgatory. And, you know, you need people. Like I was even thinking actually about like back in the Middle Ages or the Renaissance, where, you know, you would hire people to pray for you after you were dead, and how that sort of works with like the tokenomics and the cryogenics, and like, will people be tokenized to do these certain tasks, you know, for, you know, these social tasks, but the money attached to it. And even then the shift towards the Protestant Reformation and, you know, what do you call it? The whole thing, like, you know, when you're a good person, you get rich. There's a whole frame for that. Like
a prosperity gospel.
Yeah, prosperity gospel, right? So you've got the debt ledgers, like within the Catholic system, you have the prosperity gospel and like the hard work ethic of the Protestantism. And then you have these layers that I can see. The money is all bound up in all of that, and how the tokens will be mixed in, because a lot of the impacts finance space is also these religious groups. And I think from what I'm seeing, like ultimately within charter cities, you could easily have faith-based intentional communities, right, that are run on their own token systems, that are run as cooperatives. They're holons, of high tech, whether it's, Islamic or Catholic, or what have you,
Yeah.
It's not far off. Like they're setting up all the policy infrastructure right now.
Yeah.
And then is
And
that
that's why,
our morality?
and then
With
you made that
Andreessen,
good point of like, is it? And also like, where are the constitutional conservatives on this? Because this is all going to be run through like the smart contracts, and it's like, where are you? Where are you guys?
Yeah.
Because it's like, we need you. Hello, right?
It's freedom.
Oh wait, that was never your
The dom.
that was never actually your that was never your intention. Was to understand, but no, it's the John Templeton Foundation. It's quite interesting that they funded this thing called like Open Mind or whatever, where it's all about like basically like depolarizing your community, right? Like this unity, bridge building kind of. Yeah, I think I'll send that to you again. Which I thought was because because I was looking at their funding, and it was like the first one was like Templeton Foundation. I'm like, Alison,
was the Knight Foundation in there?
Where's this?
Because the Knight Foundation
so.
is all about social mixing. Like, I think I mentioned this before, but like Our Garden was part of one of their pilots, and Knight Foundation is the newspapers. Okay. They're based in Miami, and they're all about smart cities and augmented reality and working with Niantic. And so like there were discussions of people going to these meetings about the grants and being like, well, we want metrics for social mixing, which I know are all impact markets. What else?
That's what they said on Open Mind. Scalable, evidence-based approach to constructive dialogue. And it reminded me of that Minds, Ottman Minds kind of, just bridging the left-right paradigm. Like that's kind of how they sell it. As if like you're operating within that paradigm anyway, when you're just like acknowledging that that's like the paradigm you need to bridge. It's like there's a lot more to life than the right.
Get out of there.
Right, who talks like that? It's like a bunch of I don't talk like that in life. It's like, are you right wing? Are you left wing? It's like, I don't give a shit. Like don't tell me. As a matter of fact, like I don't care.
I'm not in your Skinner box.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I don't live in a container.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have I don't know if there's any outstanding questions. It looks like
I really there's the nice thing is there's a lot of I've been kind of casually trying to read the comments. It's hard for me to when I do these things I'm trying to do the tech. I'm trying to do the comments and I'm also trying to participate. Yeah. So
we need like a clone, right? Well, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
I need a digital twin to manage the
Wait, I want to say one last thing about this Open Mind thing with the Templeton. On statement, it says, as a nonprofit organization, our mission at Open Mind is to equip the next generation with the habits of heart and mind to bridge divides. It's
the world sensorium. They want your heart and mind. It's the heart-mind synthesis for the global brain.
Always.
Man. Well, that's what they said, like in Vietnam, like we need to win hearts and minds. So that was like one of the phrases. There's actually a documentary called Hearts and Minds that's actually critical of Vietnam, of course. So if you're watching, if you have some questions while we're on, go ahead and post them because I'm actually watching right now. But if you guys want to post any questions before we go, and then at the end of this, I'll let Sebs and Alison go, and I'll go ahead and replay the beginning that didn't get aired. For those.
That's where we said all the top secret stuff.
Yeah. But we're gonna we decided to declassify it, there'll be some redactions though, so no, I'm kidding.
Speaking of Vietnam, you said something about Vietnam. You were talking about Jane Fonda yesterday a little bit, right? You mentioned her, and it was it's actually I never even thought about her, but she was huge in the Vietnam anti-war. Right, that was that was.
She actually went and met.
Went there.
Yeah, she went and met with. She went and met with what's his name? My brain's not working, but yeah, they really went after her for that. But again, who knows? Maybe that was all.
Who knows, right?
Who knows?
Yeah, like this so-called radical left activist marries Ted Turner? Like what? What's that?
Hypernormalization is interesting.
yeah.
I mean, I know that the guy,
Adam
I can't remember his
Curtis
name.
film. It's on
Adam
YouTube.
Curtis, yeah. Like, I mean, he works for was it with the BBC? So like it is that,
Yeah, Adam
right?
Curtis is BBC. Yeah, he did the Bernays, Edward Bernays documentary
Century
as well.
of the Self.
A couple other Century of the Self, and among other
His
things.
overall analysis is wrong, but he has
Yeah,
lots
the framing is weird.
Yeah, his framing is off, but he has lots and lots of like little tidbits and pieces of information that are really valuable and useful.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's called hypernormalization. It came out.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out.
I do think that like the whole aerobic exercise wellness stuff is going to play a lot into this alternative energy. I know people probably think I'm crazy about that, but I do think that that's going to come in, and I think a lot of the alternative, like, and you know, the entanglements and stuff, and I think that these wellness purveyors are going to be central in selling it to everybody. Like, I think that's, you know, it's interesting to see. Like, again,
about Andrew Kaufman. Oh, sorry. Did you say something about Andrew Kaufman before? As far as he was selling something on. I don't.
Oh, he has a patent. He has a patent for like a wearable that's a like anti-suicide monitoring device. So I've always been interested in
that.
Does
it shock you? Oh, never mind.
I mean, I'm sure like it's sold as like, you know, anti-self-harm or something like that, or monitoring. But I thought that having a psychology-based wearable, I mean, because, you know, upstate New York, the more I dig into like upstate New York, it's like, wow, there's like, because that's where he's based. And I mean, it's not, I think he's at Syracuse, so I don't know if it's really Syracuse, but it's like, there's like, it was a health system up there, but you know, there's a lot in New York.
That's interesting. Because I like some of the work that he's done as far as, the whole health thing that's going on. I do appreciate some of his takes on that, but that's
the thing is, like, there is a big split. It's kind of like with blockchain about like the isolation of the virus and these sorts of things, and like looking at other like non-viral theory. And there aren't a ton of people, and the people who are saying it's more terrain, when you spend a lot of your online time with people who have a polar opposite opinion and are selling like bioweapon narratives or other things, that impacts over time. Like if you're sitting there while the other person is saying directly the opposite and you don't ever really push back, then what are people supposed to take away from that? Like that's
not a real conversation.
We do have a question here. It's kind of a broad question. How can we contribute to helping people understand what is going on? These are not easy subjects out of a large amount of knowledge about many fields. And I'll just say, you can't do anything for anybody. But what you can do for yourself is to actually study it. And I'm in a process, and I know we're all in the different stages of a process of really getting to know it and continuing to have conversations. I can't tell you how many conversations I have with people where I'm having the same conversation over and over again because it's not getting through. But at the end of the day, if someone's not willing to go take the time to learn about it, there's absolutely nothing you can do. You can't make somebody care enough to do about it. So my thing is like, hey, if you're not into, like Alison says, if you don't want to look at this, you don't have to look at it. Nobody's forcing you. But here's a lot of information if you want to actually understand what's going on. I mean, we talked about people with children. It blows my mind. Like, how can you have a child and not want to know about these systems that you're being coerced and forced to put your child into? And will be even more so increasingly. But I don't have any control over anybody but myself. But to me, like the best thing you can do is to really, really study it and know it yourself. And then to have conversations when the opportunity presents itself, and just keep chipping away. Because eventually, I tell Alison this all the time, like, even though we're frustrated that people aren't getting it, once these things that we're talking about become more and more prevalent in their daily lives, all this work that we're doing here is going to be really, really valuable for people. It's unfortunate that they're not, that they're going to wait until they're already enclosed and trapped. But whatever, that's all we have control over. I don't know. You guys have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the best you can do,
women,
like you
I'm
said,
sorry,
is
you
help,
guys,
right? ladies.
You ladies.
No, I would say just, I mean, the best you can do is just like plant little seeds, right? No matter where you are, what you do, who you work for, like what position you're in. It's like, just having that conversation with, whether it be somebody at the grocery store or anywhere, right? Anywhere that you frequent or are around, just kind of like the planting little seeds and then walking away, because I don't need the impact data on my on the seeds.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
I need that, evidence-based. What is the impact that this conversation had on? I don't know, because I feel like when you get too bogged down with that, you kind of lose the plot as well. When you get bogged down with that, then you become the thing that you're trying to inform people about. So.
Well, I'm becoming less. I'm caring less and less what other people do. Like, and say, it's just like I can't. People are going to do what they're going to do. Like I don't know. I'm going to bang my head against the wall. Allison, did you want to chime in on that? And I've got a few other questions.
No, I would just say if we were talking about earlier on, like your lens matters. And if there are things that we've talked about that you can see happening in your community, like, and you want to speak to it through your experience, like I'm open, if assuming it's, that it is good, like not good, but just if people want to reach out and like journal, like write their experience, say like, this has been my experience with some of these impact markets or what I'm seeing in my community. And I'm happy to put them out on my blog, like, and have a space. Like sometimes I've had a couple people say, my family isn't listening, but if I talk to you, like I can share your stuff with them because you're sort of more palatable than some other people to my family. And so like we can create some collective space and figure out how to, like, I need translators. I'm super long form. I'm not super convenient for the putting out in the general world. Are there people who can, figure out how to translate this into a visual graphic? Like it was wonderful that, Raul was able to help us like have those brochures, those Nephi brochures. And I'm running low on that, but like maybe we'll do one for California if we go out to California, Jason, and we'll do a California version. And like, so if there are people who can find ways of communicating and distilling or picking off a piece and talking about that, like it's a collaborative effort. I'm not here to be anybody's expert on this or anybody's like, but if you can learn it and you can tell the story, like that's, I think, how it's going to change. Not that you necessarily have to tell it the way I tell it, but tell it how you tell it. And I would say, don't discount the energetics. Like I do feel very strongly, and I know Jason's on the opposite end, but
I'm not on the opposite
I feel
end.
like okay, all right.
I do think there's an energetics. It depends on how you define
there's something
that. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know how to define it either, but I think that as much as these people would not pay attention to these alternative like physics, if it didn't matter. And I do think that as like children of God in the world, and that life stands with life, and that we can creatively, like I would love to see more creative stuff around this. I love Lynn's songs and different, like, how do we be creative about it? Because I'm not funny. Like, I do a lot of things. I'm not funny, and I'm not like, I do things my own way, but there are people with so many more gifts that we can put out, like, and to tell the story. So anyway, that's sort of learn it, come up with some quirky way to say it, and don't give up hope. Like, don't feel like I think there was an exchange recently where someone was like, I just don't feel like I can do anything in the face of this. So I'm just not, there's only one thing I could have done, and it was this, and that's not available. And so I'm just not. And I'm like, no, don't, like, find your way. You can find your way. Like, we're not alone. Like we're not alone in this. And anyway, that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Someone asked.
I feel like if you're counted. I'm sorry. I feel like if you're grounded in your principles, like genuinely and ethically, and like that's your ethics and whatnot. So you can, if you're grounded in that, then like that's really kind of all you need, to a degree. Like if you're uncompromising about that, like that's pretty much like that's the lens that you need. And of course, like you need, it's good information and stuff, and make these connections to understand your environment. But if you don't have that, like that that moral or like that ethical, like principles based like foundation, then a lot of it really means nothing. And that's just my opinion on it. So
someone asked if you can elaborate on the health leaders, maybe just briefly.
Well, I would just say, like, I've done a couple of talks early on with CRG, like a year and a half ago, about pay for success markets and wellness, because I think that's very much where it's headed next. And that's always been, you can see the narrative from the pandemic that, it was affecting certain, Black and brown people certain ways, low income people, like they were making those connections early on. And so, the frame is going to be that you have to manage your healthcare and you have to be a good, healthy person, both physically and mentally. And there will be parameters and expectations. And there will be like concierge health services and monitoring devices and, precision interventions, and that we will sort of be batteries, like to create these data for the markets, and potentially piezoelectric energy harvest, and potentially, being terraformed for post-humanism. Like, I think, and in the way that they've built it for education, they've got these education savings accounts that for people that meet certain categories, like who are in low performing schools or who have IP, special education, that you can get your voucher and go somewhere else, right? Like these are options. And even today, many employers have health savings accounts options where you can set aside a portion of your pre-tax salary into a health account and then use that, spend that down. And, again, you have some sort of financial benefit. And those are I feel very clear that those are going to be put on blockchain, and they're going to be tied to sort of concierge club membership based cooperatives. Can't you totally see a health cooperative coming up? That's, and there's going to be conditions of access based on performing wellness. But again, who gets to decide what it is to perform wellness? And especially, again, and this is where the terrain conversation comes in, we are living in a world that's affected by a tremendous environmental contamination, both chemical and electrical, that has impacts on things like diabetes, which are huge impact markets. So again, like I've told the people, like several people who are in the alternative health space, that's their business, they're going to have to come up with, like, make the decision when that comes, when people walk up to them with their health voucher, if they're going to join the blockchain and give the data on, like, and it'll be anonymized, right? It'll be, for the digital twin, for the impact markets.
De-identified twin.
Yeah, they'll sell it in something like wonderful, right? Like you're just helping, fix cancer or do whatever with your data. But that's going to be a philosophical decision. And, my understanding, because I wasn't really in the alternative health space before, like many people who were in that wellness space, like tons of them went along with the mainstream narrative around the pandemic already. And those that didn't, now they're in a subset. But even within that subset, it feels like a majority of them have already gone down the line of blockchain tools, whether it be, digital platforms or payment systems or what have you. So, I don't know what to say. I wish it wasn't that. Like, I mean, I wish this wasn't the reality, but clearly with Nick Szabo and these jokers doing smart contracts back to 1993, they've known for a while this is where it was going. Like all the Medicaid, innovation, I have all kinds of stuff about blockchain Medicaid accounts.
Yeah.
Another
Sebs, are you there? Oh, there we go.
Oh, sorry.
You cut out.
Oh, I'm here.
Were you saying something?
Yeah, my bad. Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was saying how the Medicare for All argument has also turned, is basically going to make people beg for this panopticon of biosecurity, and they don't even know it. And that's a really tough conversation to have. Like, I've been shut out from even bringing something like that up to people who are huge proponents of Medicare for All. And not because I don't think people should have health care, like absolutely, right, but just more like, okay, like have you actually seen the bill that, Pramila Jayapal is putting out? Like, do you see what it says about like where your data is going to go? Do you like, are we talking about this or are we just like, let's just get it passed and then we'll see what happens? It's like, That's not good.
Yeah.
That's not good.
No.
And
Well, it's the
honestly,
idea of
like,
progressivism, this idea that
yes,
there's this linear time and okay, well, it's not where we want, but it's getting us closer to where we want. And I think that's bullshit. It does
it is
this thing.
bullshit.
It's like you take one step forward, but it's also doing all these things that are negative. So like, how does that equation,
And it's not
actually end
informed
up?
consent.
Right, right.
It's not informed. People don't know what they're getting themselves into.
And
Which
I
is
can't
what I'm
believe that
trying to
people
say
who
in
are-
my.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I was going to
no,
say, I
I was
can't
just
believe
gonna
that
say-
people who are like politically savvy, like people who are like politically savvy, who fall in line with this, who are not questioning, like, hey, would the government currently have, like, would the Congress that we currently have really pass a Medicare for all bill that's like meant to be helpful to anybody? Like, look at who writes these bills. It's like, you talk about, oh, the lobbyists write these bills, but then you're like begging them to pass a bill. I don't know. It's just, it doesn't make any logical sense at a certain point. And I kind of just had to walk away from those conversations. It's like,
Yeah.
all right, well, good luck.
And there is no pure bill. Like we all know that these bills have
Yeah.
1,000 different things in them that often have absolutely nothing
Absolutely.
to do with one another. So there's been a negotiation that's already happened. It's and
Yeah.
you've already lost one battle and you didn't even know it.
Yeah.
Another
And it's
question.
like, why is the Department of Energy involved in, the healthcare space? Like,
Right.
that's weird. Why is the Department of Energy?
Radio
in this?
eugenics.
Doesn't
Radio
make sense.
eugenics.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone asked, is it possible to have these technologies as long as they are run by morally well-intentioned people, or do you think the tech itself is fundamentally bad? And I think that the framing of that is not. First of all, the idea of like, are you for tech or are you against tech? Is this good or bad? I think avoids like actually digging, rolling up your sleeves and looking into all the details of what it is. So to me, it's like, it's not of like being for tech or against tech. It's just looking at all the different things that come along with it. And you have to take it on an individual level. Cause I'm not,
No, I would say,
I'm not against technology,
no,
all technology, but the people that run it. Go ahead, Allison.
no. Web 3.0 is the death of nature.
Oh, I agree.
Period.
I agree 100%
That's
with
what
that.
that is tech. Like, you can't actually say like there's some other tech that's not Web 3.0.
Well, it depends on
we're
what you're
walking
talking
into-
about tech. Like a camera, I like cameras.
That's
Like, I
not
think
what they're
it's a cool
talking
invention.
about. They're
No.
talking about if Web 3.0 was run by moral people. Like, that's
Right.
our tech. That is our future reality. Is
Right.
literally we are putting a sensor in every single biological thing and on every rock and in every body of water so that we can turn it into a sensing mechanism.
Right.
Like, there's no way that's going well. Like, and
Yeah,
so
I agree.
that's
I just
the
don't know what
conversation
would you
we're
need to do that for. Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it's just like, why do you need to put sensors and everything? Like, I don't understand that. That's it's not so much that like the technology itself. It's like, well, why are we using it for this? It doesn't make sense to me.
What
like,
and the
logically.
idea that even if
Yeah.
you do have people that are like with the best intentions and trying to be well intentioned, the very existence of it itself already has values built into it. It already demands extraction. It demands surveillance. There's a lot of things attached to it, completely outside of whatever individuals are running it, or so to speak. Which we're talking about something that's not even going to be run
It's going to be a computer.
ultimately by individuals. So there's that. But I was just saying, I was initially launching it off with the Luddite argument, like, oh, they're just Luddites because they just hate all technology. I'm like, well, not necessarily. I'm not opposed to technology. I'm with you, Allison, 100%. Like the Web 3.0 and the internet, I think has even just the Web 2.0 and 1.0 is turning out for me to be way more harmful than any positive things that happen here and there. I
would
don't
just
know,
say the logic for Sebs, like the logic of it. Andreessen in his interview described this Metcalfe's law. I think that was it. Was X squared. So every node magnifies the value, like doubles it. And so that's the logic. Like, when you understand that that's the logic of capital, like in the information age, that's it. Like, I mean, I'm not to simplify it, but literally it's a capitalist logic. Like, if you're doubling value with every sensor you put down, of course they're gonna paint it. They're gonna paint the world in sensors.
Yeah.
And it feels parasitic. I mean, ultimately it does feel to me like a parasitizing, like that predator energy, but But we can say no.
Oh.
Like we can
and
I was
recognizing
going to say on that.
I was just saying, recognizing
on
that this
that-
is cybernetics. This is about governance and control. Go ahead.
I was going to say to touch on the neo-Luddite or the Luddite comment that you made. So in that Extropian, 5th annual Extropian Institute conference that Nick Szabo was talking at, they actually, and this is in 2001, they were talking about combating the neo-Luddite movement as well. That was also another topic of of conversation.
Well, even Mark Andreessen on his thing, he was like, they're just a bunch of tree huggers, and anybody that questions the technology, we're going to, we're not going to hire them. They can't be part of our group. And then,
no politics in the office.
Right. Unless they serve our
How about ethics?
Please don't bother us while we're building the digital prison, for crying out loud. Yes. We're job creators.
Shut your pie hole. We're Chris, God damn it. God.
But it's a binary, are you an environmentalist, or do you care about the economy? Or do you care about, it's like, well, it doesn't have to be framed that way necessarily.
There's multiple layers to that topic, I would say.
Yeah.
There's like, I guess layers to the onion where you'd have to, deal with this and then address that. So it's not necessarily just like a, yes, I like technology, or no, I don't like technology. I feel like that's too simple.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with humans, and it can be complicated. So.
No to the soul-bound token. That would be a thumbs down.
Yeah, that's a no for me too.
I'm with you there. I'm looking to see if there's any more questions. The nice thing is there's a lot of conversation happening.
Good.
Just hard to keep up with. But yeah, that's one of our complaints.
This is a complicated topic. These tokens, that's why, I don't have it all pinned down. But what you were saying, Sebs, with the piece about the extropians and the futarchy and the hypercerts, and looking at what I'm seeing now with the tokenized cooperatives and the hijacking and management of all of the narratives. We need to get up to speed. And it would actually be really nice if there were people who were in the blockchain space, more people who were seeing really, you want me to live in a world where everything is run on a token, the horn and heart art of freedom, that if I don't have the token, I can't do the thing. That doesn't feel so great. I keep thinking soon there will be more people that see that part. And we need interpreters. Just like I need people to interpret my theories out in a more understandable way. We also need people to build bridges to explain some of the nuances of tokenized governance, because that feels really, really important. Because soon the tokenization of the governance isn't going to be just, it's going to be people in the machine, but the overlord of the thing is going to be HAL 9000. It's not even going to be a person. It's not going to be a president. It's not going to be a head of the EU. It's going to be a computer.
ETH Denver just had I was just going to say, there's a little character that ETH Denver has created. It's a Pegabufficorn. It's a Pegasus, a unicorn, and a buffalo, Colorado buffalo.
I hate it already.
It's actually a cute little. They made a little.
Is it rainbow?
I'm just kidding.
It's actually kind of cute. They made little stuffed animals of it, but they just had a talk, and they made a graphic of it where it had a HAL eye. And then it had a tablet with a HAL eye on it. I'm like, you guys, you're using the HAL eye and the red HAL eye. I'm like,
yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Welcome to your cooperative.
Right? No, I was kind of just off of what you were saying about, that there's going to be no state. There is no, but it's not going to be some anarcho, utopia of no state. Different. But to touch on that, it does seem as though, even with Joe Biden, right? It seems as though they're trying to kind of make the leaders look totally impotent, so that people would be like, you know what I'm saying? Because at this point, it's kind of
we don't need
this has to be on purpose.
What are they doing anyway? Yeah.
Look at Biden. His health is deteriorating. He can't even complete a sentence and whatnot. It's almost to watch him, and it almost feels like this is being done intentionally, so people are just like, you know what, we don't need leaders. They'll be more
autopilot.
Yeah. So I don't know, it just kind of seems like, I mean, and then you saw Boris Johnson retired, and then there was an assassination. It just seems like there's kind of a, like eliminating. Not people were great. It's just, what's the alternative, right? So.
Yeah, I found the Hal here.
Let's
Let me see here.
Yeah, I'm feeling like the future is charter cities run by cults. Like,
yeah, Alvy can see it, but there's a little guy with his eye. One of his eyes is the Hal eye. I'm like, oh, I don't like that graphic. That doesn't make me feel good inside.
No.
I see a lot. There's some magenta there too.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I haven't had lunch yet, so I need to.
Yeah.
I forgot. I was cramming for this. We had two back to back. They're both good. But yeah, we'll link to your article in the post. I'll add that, and also like definitely check out Leo's work at Silicon Icarus on the alpha bonds, because that's feels really important. And soon, I promise, I will have my refugee post out on cybernetic charter blockchain behavioral Skinner boxes. And well, but thanks for being part of it. Sebs, do you want to say your where people can find you again?
Yeah, I have my blog on Medium, this gnomes and then number 4 truth. And then Ali and I have our little YouTube channel in the corner. It's a doom and gloom headquarters. So that's kind of where I'm at for the most part. But I was going to say, I think Leo's actually, I don't know if it's going to be this coming week. I think he might be coming on to do like a little what I've been researching kind of impromptu thing. So Leo, now I've already said it, so now you have to do it. I'm just kidding. It's like Leo, the cat's out of the bag. But yeah, so that'll be. He's a very, very kind individual, and so informed on this stuff, and his knowledge is definitely so important. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks, you guys. So at this point, I'm going to let you two go. And for those of you who are watching, if you want to stick with us, I'm going to replay the first segment because we didn't have it actually live streaming at the very beginning. It was a little technical error. It was probably human error too.
But we're human.
I swear I clicked on the thing, but I just didn't double check to make sure it had actually started. So it may be my fault, but I do have it recorded. So what I'll do now is I'll let you two go, and we'll go ahead and just play the first part again. And then Sebs, I know you wanted to copy this. I'm going to go ahead and I'll clean this up, and then we'll upload a little bit cleaner version of it up later, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah,
thanks, you guys. Good. Thanks for joining us, Seb. Thanks,
Thank you so much. Have a good night, or good evening.
Good night.
Bye, guys.
Eventually.
Yes, evening. Right, bye, everyone.
See ya. Okay, so if those of you are still with us, give me just 1 minute because I have to grab the recording and import it real quick here. But if you want to watch the very beginning of this, we're going to go ahead and play it right now. So give me just 1 moment. And thanks, you guys, for joining us. Let's see. I'm importing it. 1 second. Okay, here we go. I think I found it. I think this is it. I will find out in just a minute. One moment. I'm almost there, you guys. Hang tight. Okay, here I got it. We are actually live. Hello, anyone who is joining us. I am Jason Bosch, and I'm here with Alison McDowell and Sebs Solomon. And Sebs is with Gnomes for Truth, and they also have a YouTube channel, Doom and Gloom, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Great. So, Alison, do you kind of want to start us off? We've got a lot of interesting subject matter today, and do you want to kind of give us a launching here?
Yeah, well, so I think we initially talked about setting up this conversation a while back, and there was sort of a confluence of, Sebs, your piece that you had written about the extropians, but in the opening section, there was this essay referencing, is it futarchy? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, futarchy or
sort of this-
futarchy.
Right. So these tokenized governance models, which really intersects with a lot of what we've been talking about. And I know you guys do work into the global sort of, blockchain finance, global south, like we're both working in that same space. So when I saw that article right around the same time, Jason had shared with me a video from this guy, Dalrymple, from Hypercerts, which I have a clip of, that was talking about essentially ways in which, like under the guise of the commons and commoning, this peer-to-peer shift towards tokenization and like information participation. So I thought those two things really complemented each other well in terms of trying to look at like how the AI mapping our social relations through token transactions while imposing sort of social discipline also like harvests our, social relationships, for this machine. And that's something that, Raul and Leo have been talking about too. So those two, sort of your article and that looking into hypercerts for me is what I thought, like, we should talk about this because tokens are so complicated. And then Jason is in Colorado. So when we're talking about electronic governance and the blockchain town and, Palantir and waiting around with a bunch of maybe well-intentioned young people who think they want to save the world and think they're going to do it with tokens. Like, I think Jason might have some interesting insights into that, like on the ground. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what spurred your interest in the article initially, and like overview.
No, absolutely. And it definitely, it kind of coincided with the research that you were doing on the soulbound tokens as well, right? With the Vitalik Buterin and his paper with that. But basically, so I was looking into just the concept of like the decentralized autonomous organizations, or the DAOs. And so I was looking into that, last year. And then I came across the concept of futurarchy through the blog post that Buterin had written for the Ethereum Foundation blog, right? And so I was looking at that, and I'm like, okay.
Can we pull up her article just so we can see it? I actually have a link. I don't know if that's an option. It should be near the top.
Yep. Give me 1 second.
Sorry. Because we want to make sure people can find it.
Yeah, for sure. You keep talking. I'm grabbing it.
Yeah.
No, you're fine.
Well, Jason can pull it up on the screen. That you don't need to do it. Like, I just meant Jason, but
no, I've got it.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine. Yeah. I just no, I was going to say, is it? I'm not sure if it's is it live right now? I'm not sure if it's working because I was looking at the.
I got it up here.
Yeah, we got it. Cool. That's it. So
okay,
if people want to look it up, and a lot of good links in there.
Okay, cool. So I was looking at the. So I found that paper, right, by Buterin, and he was talking about the concept of futurarchy, and he even referenced the Robin Hanson, who's out of George Mason in Virginia, who is the guy who actually coined the term futurarchy, and he basically like policies or a government that's led by like markets. So like a market-led governance, essentially. So you'd vote on like policies that you think are gonna do well based on like the data that you would have. But it kind of goes into what you were saying as far as it's actually your digital twin that would be doing the voting for you, because it's going to learn you, right? So it's not necessarily you that has to do it, because you may not be an expert in this field or that field. So you can kind of pass on the responsibility to your digital twin that's made for you based on your data. So anyway, so I discovered, and that's how I. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, like, the more it votes for you, the more like, are you shaped by it or it's shaped by you? And like you meld, and it gets more real, like defined and granular.
Exactly. And then Robin Hanson, he was also involved in like the terror future markets that he partnered with DARPA with to do, what was it called? The policy analysis market, right? And that was supposed to be like a futures market in terrorism, right? What could go wrong? Totally, totally normal. The Buterin's paper was called Introduction to Futurarchy, right, for Ethereum Foundation. And basically, his whole idea was like the long-term benefits or advancements in technology have been. He's basically what he was saying was we've had a lot of advancements in technology. However, the humans and our governance system is not moving as fast as the technology is moving. So we need to do this other thing that might, kind of level it out a little bit, right? So he also said that it fixed voter apathy, right? And that it would also fix the problem of rational irrationality, which is one of the problems that you have in democracy, according to him. And he said, individuals are also not incentivized to learn about the possible harmful policies that they might be voting for. So this would help solve that as well. And then he also went on to say that the market would have an evolutionary pressure to get better because the individuals who are bad at predicting the outcomes of the policies would lose money and then have less influence moving forward. But then the individuals who were predicting these policies correctly, or who had good outcomes for predicting policies, they would make more money and they would have more influence. So it's just, it's so totally rigged from the beginning that it doesn't even make sense, and I can't believe that it's even like discussed as though it's like a rational suggestion.
Yeah, it's pretty out there. Have you come across like? Because I kind of, some of this is a little bit new to me too, the futarchy. Mm-hmm. I was watching a debate from actually 2010 on it with the original guy, David, what's his name? Robin Hanson, sorry.
Robin Hanson? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
and he's an extropian, so that's, yeah.
Yeah. So have we been able to connect with this with actual programs that are being not just designed, but is it still in the theoretical stage here, or?
Well, that's where the voting on blockchain would come in, because that's kind of essentially where that would lead to. So I guess it's like it would start little by little, right?
But it's not just voting on blockchain, right? It's not just voting on blockchain. Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot more to this beyond just straight up voting.
No, for sure.
I think most people would be like, wait, what?
Mm-hmm. That would be the portal into it, where they're like promising oh, this is going to be transparent and private and immutable and whatnot. So that would be kind of like the portal into this futurarchy type of government. But go ahead, Alison.
No, I think that they're really grooming like the young people to equate voting with tokenized participation in digital governance. Like that's where it's existing at this point. And a lot of it, which was quite interesting given Hanson's ties to George Mason, it's like it's hyper libertarian, and yet it's the sort of anarcho-capitalist commoning. So there's these two sort of fluid sides of people who are setting outside of the norm, who are looking for digital technology to give them some empowerment. But it's a really fluid like political spectrum where you've got like anarchists with really intense conservative structures as well. And they're all being put into the blockchain space. And it's so confusing because when you try to parse what's actually going on with the token, we don't even have a basis of experience for it. So people can't get a hold of what it means. And there's a lot of candidates right now who are calling for blockchain voting, but they don't actually know what it is. Like they think, Jason, like you were saying, that it's just like you would go annually or twice a year, wherever, to the polls and cast your vote. And that's not at all it. But I think it also has to do with like participatory. I was telling Jason earlier, like some of the Occupy stuff with consensus and broad participation and the story that's being told about broad participation. And I know even when I was doing work in the education space, I can't remember if it was one of the unions in Minnesota maybe, but they were doing like radical participatory budgeting, like their unions, or they were pushing for this sort of radical participation. But very nature, if you're going to scale this radical participation, it's going to have to happen through these technological systems that are disconnected from how people actually operate.
No, I agree. And that's also where like some of the liquid democracy stuff also comes in, because that's where you would you would let somebody else do a vote for you or vote for you in in certain policies or in certain things that you don't understand. You would pass on that responsibility because you don't have the expertise and what have you. And so to me, that's when I think like, oh, that's your digital twin. Like it's not going to actually be like a quote unquote expert, right? That's going to be your digital twin that's constructed for you. So in this
well, even the idea of representative democracy, there's a lot of things that we really believe in that maybe need to be questioned in and of itself. Like the idea of representative democracy, like the city council is going to represent you, your state government, your federal government are going to represent you. And I think if you ask most people, they would agree that these even real people, not even getting into the digital twin piece of it, don't represent them. And I actually have a friend that is dealing with a problem with the HOA. That they're pushing people out of their homes because some people took over the HOA. The HOA that's supposed to represent the people have actually put in programs that are basically going to remove people from their homes because they can't afford it. The idea of representative democracy and democracy itself, I think, need to be questioned, even before we get into the technical aspects of like how do you even design that sort of system, and the idea that like a digital twin is going to represent you is. You just said you're not an expert, but the digital twin's going to represent your interests.
Exactly.
I mean, I just don't even believe by how people. And you also mentioned anarchism, and the idea that there's something anarchistic about this is just laughable, because what we're talking about is governance, which is that's not.
But they want you to submit as a commons.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's what the commoning is that framing things as a commons-based project is a governance model, right? You're governed by your peers, or you're governed by like a communal structure. And I think, again, the narrative is such that they want you to feel like powered, like it's the peer pressure of belonging to the group. And not, I mean, we've seen that the last 2.5 years, right? Where they, create policy decisions and they compel people to go along because if you'll be totally othered if you don't agree with the consensus.
Yes, and then they create that polarity too.
Yeah, I have a link to the augmented democracy page. Okay, maybe we could pull that up. Because I think it sounds so fantastical when you talk about the idea of having an agent voting on your behalf. And again, it will be framed as progress, right? Like how progressive that we have the technology that can do this. It should be sort of in order near the top.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or you could maybe just do a search for the name. It should be searchable. So yeah,
and
the augmented democracy.
You mean liquid democracy?
No, it's augmented. It should say Cesar Hidalgo on it.
Oh, okay, yeah. I found it.
Yeah.
People democracy. Okay, found it.
Yeah.
1 sec.
So, but I think it sounds unbelievable until you actually look and see the folks who are developing it. And these are people who are connected to MIT, who've been doing this for a decade, really. I mean, the people behind who are setting up the new systems of blockchain voting know very well what's coming. But you can't even engage with people about it, I found. Even if you give them a very direct example, they just don't respond, period. Like they don't even push back. They simply it's just like throwing information into a well that just doesn't hit bottom.
Like, well, that's not what my protocol is. Like, that's not what I'm doing. So, like, why are you coming at me?
Right.
It's kind of like, no, I'm just trying to tell you, like, what maybe what bigger picture you may be a part of, rather than necessarily saying, like, oh, you're a bad person because you're doing this. It's more of just, hey, like, are you aware of these things? And you would think that you would welcome that because that's how you have a conversation. It's just.
Well, and also I think a lot of it is it's difficult too because these things have not been fully implemented yet. And there are a lot of some of them are still in development. They're in different stages of. So some of the work that many of us have been doing has been kind of looking ahead. Okay, where's this going? And so like unless it's affecting them on a day to day too, it's harder for them to like, it's like they won't see it until it's like right in front of their face, like until they're actually living it or something,
Yeah.
But you would think that people in Utah who are running on blockchain voting would, So.
Well, I mean, because then it kind of goes back to the other thing that you mentioned, like earlier in the email, Allison, where it's like, was all of this whole thing with the, the voter fraud or election fraud thing kind of setting it up so that this is going to be the system that people ask for, like beg for, right? Because they're like, oh, look, our elections are rigged. So
yeah,
I think that.
And I think I have two things I pulled up. Like one is the Heritage Foundation that's talking about like they have a whole dashboard of voter fraud, and so that's the one angle. And then Jason and I were speaking earlier about then like the liberal side is, oh, they're hacking, like the voting, we don't know what's happening in the black box in the voting machine. So like they've got different stories they're telling both sides about you can't trust the system in and of itself. But all the while knowing that it's driving towards this later outcome. And yeah, the whole narrative, the stolen elections. And again, like how do you thread that needle? Like, sure, things are not great. There are problems, but is the answer that everyone gets a digital identity number so that they can do this radical participatory voting?
Yeah, exactly.
Very.
It's like one way or another, they're gonna get you. They're gonna get you in that realm, whether it's through the driver's license, through the health pass, or through the voting or what have you, electronic health record. Like one way or another, like you will be chained into this structure that's been built for you. So
well, I get what you're saying, Allison.
It's
like you would think people working in the space would have a broader view of this. So and it's true that even people working in the space don't see it. Like, well, who was the guy that you met up with in Utah? The neighbor.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't want to say anybody's particular name, but yeah, I mean, people. I mean, they're working in a narrow construct, and I mean, part of the reason I was curious to talk to you a little bit, Jason, is just like Colorado is one of the key states for electronic governance on blockchain. So there's various states that are competing. You've got the Wyoming and Texas and various things for crypto. But I really feel like in terms of the actual government system, Colorado is a center. And I think in some ways, because it's also like the second White House and disaster happens or whatever, like the cybernetic aspect. I was seeing early on in the education space that they were doing blockchain education. It was like the first state to have the blockchain education coming through and workforce pathways. But do you have a sense that, folks in Colorado like can even contextualize any of this? Like,
they have no idea. They have no idea. Most people don't even know that we have digital driver's licenses available to them here. So yeah, people are pretty unaware of what's going on. And I was kind of looking back, like our state government had a blockchain council from July of 2018 to June of 2019. So they had kind of a task force where they were developing, and actually and I haven't read them, but they have all their meeting notes online you can actually look at. So I was kind of planning on scanning through those and seeing, but there's a lot of stuff going on. We actually have a couple bills that dealt with Oh, cattle and livestock. They're working on, using putting all the cattle. They start with. It's interesting. There's an interesting article in Wired magazine, interview with Jared Polis from earlier this year, right after the East Denver, because he participates in that, and he's using cattle. The tracking of cattle as an example of the good uses of blockchain. But obviously in my mind, I'm like, we're the cattle.
But that's really fascinating.
Oh no, I was gonna say, didn't they move, or didn't Trump move the what is it, the Bureau of Land Management, like the real BLM, to Colorado? During his tenure or during his presidency?
I
thought that was.
Don't know that actually. I don't know if that's the case. I should look that up. I hadn't heard.
I thought because they deal with all of the grazing, because they deal with all of the land, all the public land, essentially. Yeah.
Right.
So I'm curious. I wonder if that has any significance, because you're saying that they were testing that in Colorado. So I'm curious. Like,
yeah.
I wonder if that had anything to do with it.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, but I'll look that up. I'm curious too.
Well, because you've done a lot of work, Sebs, on like some of the drone and like rural, like rural telecom stuff that you've been looking into. So
yeah, that's definitely it's kind of creepy, because it's sold as something else, right? Just like, oh well, you want faster internet, and we can use white space internet, and to do it this way, and Elon Musk is going to send all these nano satellites to space, and they're going to be orbiting the Earth, and that's going to make for better internet connection in rural. It's a lot of focus on rural for sure, as far as getting them like connected, right?
Yeah, Lynn's talked a lot about that. And I would say too, like with the cattle, if you understand this as sort of new empire, right? Like the manifest destiny and the enclosures, like understanding what happened to the open range, right? I mean, indigenous lands, and then open range, and then fenced range. Because when we went out to, Morris Strong's holdings there, what was the name of that town, Jason? In Colorado.
Oh, Crestone.
Little town.
Crestone,
yeah. Like that land holding that they had there in Crestone was one of the first fenced enclosures, like of the open range. And so, yeah, we're the cattle, but then there is this sort of legacy of enclosures, and then knowing that, Colorado Springs has this whole division of the Space Force, and that a lot of the GPS satellite systems are the new, not the barbed wire, right? The new version is your satellite and other,
it's a panopticon, right? Because you don't even know that you're being watched. They'll make it so that you don't even know. You'll be comfortable in your prison. You won't even know it's a prison. So
you won't even know. That's the thing.
Well, as far as Colorado, I was just going to say, they're setting it up where you can pay your taxes in crypto. And it's not that the state's actually taking the crypto, but they're setting up a thing where it'll convert it for you, and then but they're acting as a facilitator. They're not just some disinterested third party. They're by setting this up, they are putting a major governmental stamp of approval on cryptos. Many of which. Not many. They're these speculative things. And Polis in this article here says he wants Colorado to be for co-ops what Delaware is. What Delaware is for corporations.
Oh my gosh, I need to add that to my piece.
That's a quote. That's an actual quote of him. And so if we all know, like Joe Biden's Delaware, and the reason why Delaware is such a magnet for all the banks is because they don't have good, many regulatory controls over the bank. So these particularly credit card companies could charge exorbitant amounts of interest, and it's very the predatory banking and corporate entities that are operate out of Delaware. I just, to me, it's like that's not a good selling point, Polis. I thought that was a good selling point. I'm like, wait a minute, what? So,
well, listen, on the cooperative, could we pull the little clip that I have about the disco disco, it's a
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
about
for
in the
sure. Yeah, yeah.
So this is something I've just been doing the last couple of days. And Sebs, I guess you had run across this peer-to-peer foundation as well, but they're under the guise of commenting, like it's sort of crypto commenting, right? Like liberate emancipation through high technology. And so they've got these use cases that started out in Spain, which a lot of what I'm looking at now is this Mondragon Corporation in Spain, which this isn't a direct affiliate, but it's sort of an outgrowth of this cooperative mentality, but on blockchain. And so they're trying to pitch like edgy, right? Like you're edgy, you're, we're woke, we're edgy, we're doing all the things, we're doing it on blockchain, collective liberation, right? Like it's interesting when you have this lens back through things, you're like, oh man, like that's not what we thought. So this is just about a 1-minute clip for something where instead of DAOs, they're doing decentralized cooperatives, and they're calling it DISCO. So it's a decentralized cooperative, and it's embedded in ecofeminism, right? So they're like literally coding and using tokenization to underwrite like care work. So it's sort of the Sylvia Federici angle, but all of it quantified in code and then exchanged. And I will just say that they have a small number of use cases that are affiliated with this. It started off with a activist translation service based out of Madrid, or I think they're in Andalusia now, like an activist translation, but they've got a couple of maker spaces. One is in Zimbabwe. They're working with Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi. And they have this other one with like these sheep herding, like cultural heritage folks. So they're definitely trying to brand it in a certain way. So maybe we
And also, I don't know if you saw, but we have like almost nobody watching, so I don't know if YouTube is put their foot down or what. But if you guys, I don't know if you guys have shared
I didn't see
this.
that it was. I didn't see that it was live. Actually, it doesn't say that it's live on the YouTubes from what I checked.
Okay, yeah. You know what? It didn't hit live. That's okay. We're recording this. I'll upload it later. We missed. I apologize. I don't know what happened there. I hit the button.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay, here we are. Okay, so we missed. For those of you joining us, we missed. I think there was a technical glitch. It didn't go live immediately. So I was like, nobody's watching. Like, what the hell's going on here? So Sebs pointed out that so for some reason it didn't click. So I'll upload it afterward with what you missed, folks. But thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Greetings.
Thank you, Sebs. I wish you would have said that, but
I'm sorry.
I was like, nobody's commenting. What the hell's going on here? Okay. Anyway,
I thought it was like on a delay or something. My bad.
Yeah, that would have been a serious delay. So, Allison, you want to just set up this clip real quick? Or I guess you kind of already have.
So
Okay, so if you guys, so that was just me replaying the beginning there, and that's kind of where we left off with the live. And I think that was my fault because I clicked the live button over here and I thought it had started, and then I got wrapped up over here. Didn't realize it was. Anyways, so I'm actually going to clean it up and upload another version where I actually have it in the proper order. But if you do want to watch the rest of this, if you joined us late, you can you've got the link. Just go back to the beginning and start it all over. But thanks again for joining us, and appreciate all your comments and questions. And until next time, I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream.